Chapter 378. An inauspicious bird cry rang out in the dark night. The clouds parted and the moon rose. Occasionally, a black shadow swept out from the treetops. Up the mountain, Fan Xian and Gao De returned to the carriage. Fan Xian said to Deng Ziyu, "Be quiet." Deng Ziyu nodded and gently waved the reins. The horse with its teeth pulled the carriage. It went around the deathly silent courtyard and headed toward the back of the city. Behind the courtyard was a hill hidden in the darkness. There were also spring trees. Looking down from there, no one should be able to discover their group. In the carriage, Fan Xian silently took off the gloves on his hands. The gloves were as thin as a layer of skin. He carefully wiped the blood on the soft sword with his glove and confirmed that there was no longer a trace of blood on the sword. Only then did he put the soft sword back to his waist. Then he steadily flicked his index finger. Some powder fell on the glove, and with a boom, it burst into flames. Gao De glanced at him and took out a metal bucket from under the chair and placed it in front of him. Fan Xian threw the burning gloves into the metal bucket and narrowed his eyes at the gradually dwindling flame. The flames in his eyes also gradually extinguished. Before long, the carriage had already reached the top of the hill. The courtyard below was still silent. The people inside were either dead or unconscious, so they could not make any noise. No one knew that a murder had occurred inside, so no one would come to see. No one knew what Fan Xian was preparing to see by staying on the mountain behind. Deng Ziyu gently patted the back of the horse's neck. He entered the carriage and sat down silently. Fan Xian lifted a corner of the curtain and looked down. He didn't know how long he had looked, but there was still no change. It will probably be a long time before they discover what happened here. Deng Ziyu looked at the time. It should be the middle of the night. He urged Fan Xian, "They won't come so early." Fan Xian smiled. He knew he was indeed a bit impatient. He quietly said something to Gao De and then leaned against the back of the chair and closed his eyes to rest. Gao De lifted up a blanket and covered his body. Gradually, his slightly cold body warmed. Fan Xian felt drowsiness in the warmth. Just like this, he fell into a deep sleep. After sleeping for an indeterminable amount of time, Fan Xian opened his eyes and made a sound of acknowledgement. Deng Ziyu lifted the curtain and glanced down. Lowering his voice, he said, "They're here." Fan Xian lifted the blanket and put his head by the window. He narrowed his eyes and looked down. Outside the house that Yuan Meng had been living in seclusion all this time, a person suddenly appeared. That person knocked on the door with familiarity. The rhythm of the knocking clearly hid some kind of secret signal. It seemed that he was the contact person of the Jiangnan forces responsible for contacting Yuan Meng. The man was wearing a thin cotton coat and had an ordinary appearance. He knocked on the door of the house for a long time and found that no one answered him. He seemed a little surprised and nervous and immediately retreated into the darkness. Fan Xian, who was watching from the top of the mountain, was not anxious. He knew that this person would definitely return. Sure enough, that person didn't go far. After a short while, a person's head sneakily poked out from the northwest wall. It was that person who was spying on what was happening in the courtyard. The man gathered his courage and jumped into the courtyard. The three people on the mountain could no longer see what that person saw in the courtyard. They could only hear an extremely suppressed soft cry. That person must have finally discovered the large number of corpses in the courtyard and the tragic scene of a pool of blood. The courtyard door was immediately pushed open. That person lowered his head and rushed into the darkness, presumably to report to his master. Fan Xian stretched lazily in the carriage and yawned. Only now did he notice that the sky was gradually turning white. He couldn't resist smiling and saying, "It's almost daybreak. If the other party wants to hide this matter, they have to hurry." Deng Ziyu nodded. Each manor has sent people to keep watch. Whoever receives this news tonight will have intelligence reports tomorrow. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Guess, who exactly are the people who are coming to take care of Yuan Meng's funeral today?" Deng Ziyu forced a smile and said, "The Suzhou government will certainly send people." "Sir, I'll keep watch here. You should go back to the manor and rest first." Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything more. Yuan Meng's death shocked the Jiangnan officials who were secretly protecting her. killing in the night and spying in the morning. Anyone who could learn of Yuan Meng's death in such a short time and rush to take care of the funeral was, of course, the official who played a dishonorable role in this matter. More accurately, who exactly were the eldest princess' trusted aides in Jiangnan Road? They should be able to find out a bit this morning. Fan Xian had no other choice. The Overwatch Council did not have enough people in Jiangnan. It was impossible to place a fatal spy in every manner. They could only use the method of separating and monitoring and the method of killing Yuan Jingming to investigate. Recently, the Suzhou Zhizhou had been busy listening to Song Shuren and Chun Buchang's debate in court every day. Not only had he neglected government affairs, but his state of mind had also been greatly exhausted. Every night, he fell into a deep sleep. Even his most beloved third concubine rarely went to be intimate with her. Thus, when he was called out of his bed early this morning, he was very angry. After he heard the news, it was like a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. All of his anger disappeared without a trace in an instant. Incomparable shock and deep worry surged into his mind. Yuan Meng was dead? This matter had happened too suddenly. How could he explain it to the second prince, the heir, and the eldest princess? As he hurriedly put on his clothes, he ordered someone to summon the advisor of the manor. By the time the advisor arrived, the Zhizhou had already put on his clothes. With a glimmer of complaint, he said, "Why did you come so slowly? Yuan Meng is dead." The advisors were all trusted aides of these old officials. There was nothing they would hide from each other. Of course, this advisor also knew about Yuan Meng's matter. He smiled bitterly and said, "If she's dead, then she's dead. Since the imperial envoy has come to Suzhou, and that Yuan Meng is still not willing to leave, in the end, only death awaits her." The Zhizhou furrowed his brows and said, "She hid it so well." "You mean it was the Overwatch Council who did it?" "Other than the Overwatch Council, what other power in Jiangnan could silently kill Yuan Meng?" The advisor analyzed. "Sir, you must not panic at this time. In any case, Yuan Meng is already dead, so it is impossible for the Overwatch Council to discover our connection to her. If you react inappropriately now, it will instead allow the Overwatch Council to discover your connection to this matter." The advisor's considerations were indeed sufficiently cautious. The Zhizhou thought for a bit and furrowed his brows. "But I still feel it strange. If it was the imperial envoy who did it, why didn't he capture Yuan Meng and instead directly kill her? If the imperial envoy wanted to use the matter of the Ministry of Justice's wanted notice to move against me, then he shouldn't have handled it this way." The advisor also didn't understand this point and guessed Yuan Meng was someone close to the second prince and the heir. Although the Ministry of Justice had issued a wanted notice, no official under heaven would dare to risk offending the nobles in the capital to capture her. "Sir, you don't have to worry too much. Everyone is like this as for why the Overwatch Council didn't capture her alive. I think perhaps Yuan Meng knew she wouldn't be able to survive the Overwatch Council's punishment, so she committed suicide. We still have to go and see." The Zhizhou made up his mind. "At least we have to know some details." The advisor resolutely and decisively dissuaded. "Sir, you cannot go." The Zhizhou furrowed his brows. "Why? Naturally, I won't go in full glory. It's almost daybreak. If I don't quickly tidy up and word gets out, the Ministry of Justice in Jingdou will certainly have something to say. The Overwatch Council will also use this as a pretext to make a fuss. How will the Suzhou government answer the emperor's questions?" If the Overwatch Council wanted to use this as a pretext to make a fuss, they wouldn't have made this a dead question today, the advisor reminded. "Who knows how many pairs of eyes are watching over there right now? Sir, you definitely cannot go. As for dealing with the aftermath, I'll disguise myself in a bit and bring some trusted aides over." The Zhizhou thought that this would indeed be much safer, so he agreed to this suggestion. This official and advisor thought their reaction could be considered cautious. They had not expected that when the advisor dressed as a morning attendant and slipped out from the back of the manor, a secret agent hidden in the alley outside the Zhizhou Yamen had long seen this scene clearly. By the time the Suzhou government advisor sat in the little green curtained sedan chair and came to the outskirts of the courtyard Yuan Ming was hiding in, he found that there were already strange people on the streets. His heart tightened. He lifted the curtain of the sedan chair and relaxed. He furrowed his brows at the cloth-clad man who had hurried to the side of the sedan chair and said, "What exactly happened? How did she just die like this?" The cloth-clad man was the Suzhou Thousand Man. He was also one of the officials who had been woken from his bed by the news of Yuan Meng's death. He should have been stationed outside the city, but his manor was inside the city, so he was the first person to arrive. Hearing the advisor's question, the Thousand Man said without good humor, "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" The advisor paused and got off the sedan chair. The two of them looked at each other's clothing and couldn't help but sigh and smile bitterly. They were official advisors, yet they were forced to wear the clothes of commoners. "Is the street clean?" The advisor turned his face slightly to the side, covering his face as he asked carefully. The Thousand Man replied, "Don't worry, my subordinates have already cleaned it up. There shouldn't be anyone watching from the side." The advisor nodded and walked shoulder to shoulder with the Thousand Man into the courtyard. Entering the courtyard and looking at the corpses all over the ground and the tragic sight, the advisor couldn't help but feel nauseous. He covered his mouth and nose and said, "Where is Yuan Meng's body? In the room?" The advisor forcefully suppressed his nausea and fear and walked into the room to take a look. He saw Yuan Meng's death with her eyes wide open. Going forward to confirm that she was completely dead, the advisor relaxed a little and sighed. "I really don't know how to explain this to the capital. Let's clean it up first," the Thousand Man said hatefully. "It's almost daybreak. If someone sees this, it will probably immediately spread throughout Suzhou. What'll we do then?" No one from Ming family came. That group of unscrupulous merchants, they're afraid the imperial envoy is watching in the dark, so they won't show themselves. The two of them walked out of the courtyard door and were greeted by a few people who had come later. A number of people gathered together and spoke with heavy expressions. They felt that this matter should have been done by the Overwatch Council, but it also shouldn't have been done by the Overwatch Council. After discussing this and that, they came to a conclusion. They didn't know how to handle it. The wounds on the body have all been torn apart. Although it can be seen that it was a sword, it is difficult to see the style of the sword. We only know that there was only one person who did it. Of course, it was an ace. A person who looked like he was skilled in torture said in a low voice, "If it was the Overwatch Council who killed, why would they need to hide it?" In the end, it was the advisor representing the Suzhou Jizhou who made the decision and coldly said, "It's better if this case is not solved. All of us need to retreat and have our subordinates clean this place up. If the Overwatch Council doesn't care, then we'll bury this matter. If the Overwatch Council really has spies following, in any case, don't drag us down. When the time comes and they ask, just say we received a report and came to look at the case." The Qian director made a pei sound and scolded, "I am a general. How can I come to look at the case?" The advisor rolled his eyes at him and said, "Who told you to rush over in such a hurry?" There was nothing to argue about. A number of people began to split up. Those responsible for cleaning up cleaned up, those responsible for burying people buried people, and those responsible for going back to the manor to do paperwork. As for whether or not this matter would be reported, it would depend on what the news from the imperial envoy side was like. As these people were busy, they did not notice that on a distant hill, there was a completely black carriage slowly driving away like a ghost. The people had been killed by Fan Xian, yet these Jiangnan road officials had to bury them. However, he certainly did not have any thoughts of taking advantage of them. As for the sword wounds on the bodies in the courtyard, they had all been treated a second time because he didn't want Sigu Jian's wounds to get out. Since it was impossible to frame Dongyi, then there was no need to take this risk. Thus, he didn't even let Gao to see his actions. Most importantly, he couldn't let the emperor in the palace know that he knew Sigu Jian. Otherwise, the emperor would certainly think of the assassin in the Hanging Temple, Sigu Jian's brother, and the Overwatch Council. That would bring a terrifying result. The carriage moved slowly. Fan Xian smiled coldly in the carriage and said, "Yuan Ming died, and the Jiangnan Road officials are already so shocked. Are these officials all dogs raised by the eldest princess? Deng Ziyu glanced at Gouda and guessed that the commissioner wanted to borrow Gao Da's ears to complain to the emperor in the palace. He smiled and replied, "The eldest princess has been in Jiangnan for a long time. She will always have some trusted aides. Did you see all the people who came today clearly? Some of their faces are unfamiliar, but since these people all came from the manor, presumably, the spies below have seen them clearly. In a bit, there will be definite news." Deng Ziyu sighed. However, the Ming family is quite straightforward. They know they can't touch this matter, so they won't come. Fan Xian also felt it was a bit of pity. He had thought that even if he couldn't use Yuan Ming's matter to dig out a large piece of the Ming family, he could at least make them feel a bit more uncomfortable. The carriage quietly traveled to Hua Garden. Fan Xian felt a bit sleepy and waved his hand for the two of them to go rest while he returned to the back residence. Cece had been lying on the table waiting for his return. Seeing him enter the room, she quickly poured hot water for him to warm his feet. She knew that the young master didn't want too many people to know about what happened tonight, so it wasn't convenient for her to order the servants and serving girls to make hot food. She personally brought over the bird's nest that had been warmed in the water and helped him eat it. Fan Xian drank all the paste in the bowl in one gulp with satisfaction. After warming his feet, he fell onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep. He didn't wake up until the afternoon. He didn't know what kind of changes would occur in Suzhou because of Yuan Ming's death, but he didn't care too much. Knowing that he had woken up, Deng Ziyu walked in somewhat haggard after Cece's announcement and handed him the case file in his hands. Fan Xian took it and glanced through it. Written on it were all the Yamens that had acted strangely in Suzhou this morning. He couldn't resist narrowing his eyes and sighing. F***CK, this city full of officials, they're all enemies. Are they going to let people live their days? Once Yuan Ming died, they were able to keep their composure. Deng Ziyu forced a smile and said, "The officials are caught in the middle. Their days are not going to be easy." Fan Xian shook his head and smiled coldly. "Since we already have the name list, their days in the future will be even harder. Send the name list back to Jingdo and have the second bureau begin to investigate the old records. If we want to move against someone, we have to dig out his past. Even if he took a dozen liang of silver a dozen years ago, we still have to dig it out." Deng Ziyu knew that as Fan Xian made up his mind to move against the Ming family, he would also move against these officials along the way. He didn't dare to breathe too loudly and agreed in a low voice. When Fan Xian read to the end, the anger in his eyes gradually rose. Hatefully, he threw the file onto the table and cursed in a low voice. As expected, Xueqing also knows of this matter. This Sir Sure is jubilant on the wall. For Fan Xian, killing Yuan Jingming today would not shock him with any information that the Jiangnan officialdom would reveal because of this. The eldest princess and the Ming family had operated in Jiangnan for a long time. This area of officialdom was filled with their people. Given the power and position in Fan Xian's hands, he was not worried in the face of this kind of resistance. What he wanted to see clearly was how the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, was prepared to stand in this matter. Xueqing was a border official. Even if Fan Xian had the identity of an imperial envoy, he couldn't do anything to him. Furthermore, the governor was also in charge of civil and military affairs. The power he could control was too great. If even he stood against Fan Xian, the resistance to Fan Xian taking in the Ming family would become abnormally strong. Deng Ziyu saw his slightly angry expression and carefully comforted. "The governor's manor has received the news, but it has not made a sound, nor has there been any reaction, sir. After all, he is a governor. If the officials below him have connections in the capital and Yuan Jingming is hiding in Jiangnan, this matter cannot be hidden from him. However, he doesn't want to offend you, and he certainly doesn't want to offend the princes in the capital. This matter doesn't mean anything. Governor Xue should still be neutral." Fan Xian thought for a moment, and also found that his reaction seemed to have been a bit excessive. Perhaps it was the hidden nervousness under these few days of laxness that made him overly sensitive. He couldn't help smiling self-mockingly and said, Thank you for your auspicious words, but you should still go make arrangements. The day after tomorrow, I will visit Xueqing again. Deng Ziyu was startled and seemed to have something he wanted to say. Fan Xian glanced at him and smiled. If you have any ideas, just say them. Why are you still acting like a woman in front of me? Deng Ziyu smiled and said, I don't think you should be in a rush to visit Sir Shui in the near future. Oh, why is that? Fan Xian asked curiously. Deng Ziyu analyzed. After all, the governor is still neutral. If you visit the manor, given your personality, you will probably immediately force the governor to immediately take a stand. What if the governor doesn't do as you wish? Then what should we do? In my opinion, it is best to let Governor Shui maintain the attitude of watching the show. We will continue to do what we need to do, and the Ming family will continue to press. As long as the governor does not make up his mind, there will be no one who can oppose you. Then, we will have more time to do things. He continued, you want the governor to make up his mind. In reality, the slower the governor makes up his mind, the better it is for us. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, right now, we are only making small moves against the Ming family. Xueqing can still watch the show. If after the new year, I actually make a killing move, Xueqing can't continue to watch the show. At that time, he will have to pick a side. My heart is a bit unsteady. Deng Ziyu thought for a bit and smiled. I think at least wait until you go to Wuzhou before we talk. Fan Xian immediately understood his meaning. Governor Xueqing of Jiangnan Road was the former Prime Minister Lin Ruofu's favorite student, and Lin Ruofu was Dabao and Wan Er's father, his father-in-law. Even if Xueqing didn't have to give his father-in-law face right now, his father-in-law would certainly know Xueqing's bottom line. That makes sense. Fan Xian immediately felt his heart relax a great deal. Laughing loudly, he said, stand in line and add weight. Although my father-in-law is almost rusty, his weight is not light. Deng Ziyu chuckled. Fan Xian looked at Deng Ziyu's tired expression and asked curiously, you didn't sleep in the morning? Deng Ziyu respectfully replied, I had to confirm this information, so I spent some time. Fan Xian had wanted to urge him to relax, but thinking of his earlier behavior, it seemed that he was in no position to convince the other party. He couldn't resist smiling. Suddenly, he thought of another matter and asked seriously, Ziyu, before you entered the Qinian unit, you were in the second bureau, right? Deng Ziyu glanced at him in astonishment and nodded. He didn't know why the commissioner would suddenly ask this question. Wang Qinian will return to the country at the end of summer. Fan Xian looked at him and smiled. Fan Xian looked at him and smiled. The council is preparing to let him take over the first bureau. Thus, Shangjing and Northern Qi need someone who can hold the fort. You've been with me for almost 2 years and have seen some things. Do you have the courage to travel north? For now, I won't ask for monthly votes in the title. I just don't think it's pretty enough. Allow me to say a few words inside. In reality, I've already put in a lot of effort in asking for monthly votes, only I don't know how to ask for them. I really want monthly votes. This is the truth. I really don't know how to ask for votes. This is also the truth. I had diarrhea today and was very miserable. Can this be considered a reason to ask for votes? If I want to have more updates, I really don't have that ability. Comfort myself and everyone. My updates excel in stability and endurance. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu. Com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 379. Deng Ziyu thought for a moment and understood the commissioner's words very clearly. The so-called head of Northern Qi was indeed a risky assignment. However, it was also the most important link on the Overwatch Council's external battlefront. Anyone who had held this position would be given an important position after returning home. There was no need to talk about the previous Yin Bingyun, Sir Yin Jr. At such a young age, he had already become the head of the 4th Bureau. Everyone knew that after Director Chan retired and Sir Fan Jr. took over the position of director, Sir Yin Jr. would certainly have an even more important assignment. Deng Ziyu's familiar old superior, Wang Qinian, had been in the council for 10 years. The moment he met Fan Xian, he had been sent to northern Qi. Hearing the commissioner's earlier words, after Wang Qinian returned home, he would also become the new head of the First Bureau. The trip to northern Qi was risky, but it was also political gilding. The commissioner had asked him if he was willing to go to northern Qi because he was prepared to promote him. Furthermore, he had heard that the old head of the Second Bureau was getting old and preparing to retire. He had also come from the Second Bureau. Deng Ziyu's heart was endlessly excited. He knelt in front of Fan Xian and said in a low voice, "I will listen to your arrangements." Fan Xian smiled and didn't continue to say anything. Through the Jiangnan matter, he felt more and more that although the emperor trusted him greatly, he still absolutely prevented him from having any connection with the military. It was to the extent that when he did things, the absolute power he held in his hands was still limited. Otherwise, he would not be so afraid of the existence of the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing. The person sitting on the throne didn't even trust his legitimate son, much less Fan Xian. Fan Xian knew that it was already good that the emperor had given him so much power. However, he also knew that the other party would not allow him to expand his power. Since it was difficult to obtain power from outside, then Fan Xian had to hold the power he already held more firmly. For example, the Overwatch Council in the post-Qin Pingping era had to change its blood. It had to be replenished with new blood loyal to him. Deng Ziyu reported to him the Overwatch Council's recent actions in Jiangnan. The main focus was still on the Ming family. Although the Overwatch Council was in charge of supervising the governance of officials and did not have direct power over the power of the people, there was no lack of reasons from the government in this world. The Overwatch Council had already made early preparations. At any time, they could follow Fan Xian's orders and intervene in Jiangnan affairs. From the palace treasury to Suzhou to the docks, from the tents to the warehouses, they would suppress the Ming family in all aspects. This was all Fan Xian could do at the moment. Since they could not find concrete evidence of the Ming family's crimes, it was impossible to use official power to suppress them. The officials of Jiangnan Road were all watching him. Presently, the Overwatch Council's job was to further reduce the Ming family's income through harassment of the Ming family's trade routes, as well as the Palace Treasury Transport Company tampering with the supply of goods. This would cause the other party's flowing silver to sink into a shortage. Only by doing this could they force the Ming family to continue moving silver on a large scale. And the method was actually hidden in the transfer of silver. How long has it been since there was any news from the island? Fan Xian furrowed his brows. The island matter that was enough to crush the Ming family had suddenly sunk into silence. Deng Ziyu heard Fan Xian's worry and also had some misgivings in his heart. He reported, "The Chuanzhou branch also feels that the matter is strange and has already sent people to the island. There will probably be news back the day after tomorrow." Jiangnan was vast. It would take too long for news to travel from the islands of the Eastern Sea to Suzhou. Fan Xian knew that he could only wait for now. After Deng Ziyu left, only then did Fan Xian feel a little tired. He stretched and walked out of the room, taking a stroll in Hua Garden. Although the Hua Garden was Yang Jimei's luxurious garden, it wasn't tainted with too much of the wealthy aura of a salt merchant or the arrogant smell of illicit salt peddlers. Instead, it was beautiful and elegant. The shallow, flowing water, verdant fake mountains, layer upon layer of mountain peaks, and the pavilions that lined the corridors and the mountain pavilions were all arranged by the skillful hands of the designer back then. The entire garden seemed to have come to life, like the verdant mountains of Jiangnan, like the clear water of West Lake, gently and lightly surrounding the people in the garden. This kind of skillful arrangement of man and nature being one was, without question, what the direct descendant of Tianyi Dao, Haidang, most of her time in Suzhou was spent quietly thinking in the garden and did not go out to seek out the elegance of the Jiangnan people. Thus, when Fan Xian saw the flowery clothing by the little lake, he was not surprised. Such a thing as fishing does not seem to suit you. He walked to the edge of the lake and sat down. He was slightly closer to the shore than Haidang. There was a foot of distance between the two of them. From this angle, he could just see Haitang's steady shoulders and the flowery cloth wrapped around her head. Beside her was a normal yellow straw hat. Hiding did not turn her head and replied evenly, "Why not?" The bamboo pole in her hand did not move at all. Only the tip of the pole nodded, as if greeting the fish in the water. There was no other meaning. Fan Xian smiled and rubbed his moss-covered hands carelessly by his side. Fishing is also killing. I'll teach you a method. You don't need to put out bait. Just use your heart to fish. This was a trick he had read in the novels of his previous life. In those mysterious novels, mysterious characters liked to play the most. Unexpectedly, Haidang still did not turn her head or move. On the contrary, she laughed mockingly and said, "What a boring thing. If you don't use bait, does that mean you don't want to fish?" Fishing in the heart. Since what you seek is temperament, if your heart is hooked, then naturally you're hooking. As for whether or not you can hook it, what difference does it make? Fan Xian was angry and bitter. He just wanted to chat. Why did she have to create such a pointless conversation? Haidang turned her head to glance at him and smiled. "I know your heart hasn't been calm these days. Why don't we sit together? Fishing is very good at calming the heart." Fan Xian shook his head and smiled. A gentleman stays away from the kitchen, much less a fishing net and hunting fork. Haidang couldn't resist rolling her eyes at him and shaking her head. Hypocritical fellow. Fan Xian chuckled and moved forward a little. Unexpectedly, his bottom slipped and he almost slid into the lake. It made his hands and feet flustered and he began to cry out. There were rocks by the lake, but no trees or grass. Other than Haidang, there was no place for him to lean on. Very naturally, his hands grabbed on Haitong's shoulders. Haitong's shoulders shook slightly and shook his hands away. She turned her hand around to hold onto his wrist and helped him stabilize his balance. Smiling slightly, she said, "Not only are you hypocritical, even your acting is so fake. How can there be a 9th level ace in this world who can't even sit steadily?" Fan Xian raised his head to the sky and sighed. "The world doesn't know me, and Duo doesn't believe me. How can I live like this?" Haidang flipped her wrist and had him sit beside her. Very naturally, she took out another fishing rod beside her and stuffed it into Fan Xian's hand. "Since you want to fish, you have to be patient. Don't rush." Her words carried a double meaning, but Fan Xian knew that she was not talking about the problem of picking up girls. Rather, it was the problem of dealing with the situation in Jiangnan. He smiled and took out an earthworm from the small clay jar beside him. He hung it on the hook and dropped it into the water. He then scattered some of the scraps Duo had prepared and put them into the water to lure the fish. The lakeside immediately entered a state of calm. A moment later, Fan Xian's clear and light voice broke this rare tacit understanding. "I am patient and I am not in a rush. The situation in Jiangnan is not difficult to control. Furthermore, the plan has been set. I have the confidence to walk it step by step. The problem is that Jiangnan is watching Jingdo, but I cannot control what will happen in Jingdo. Things there could develop in the direction I want them to, or they could suddenly erupt into a major incident that no one can react to." Major incident? Correct. Fan Xian didn't continue. He only carried a glimmer of doubt and a glimmer of sincere admiration. "You know I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Then you must also know who the true elders of the Overwatch Council are. Xiao En of the north, Ping Ping of the south." There was a glimmer of bitterness in Haitong's smile. "That Director Chun has killed countless people in the north. How can we not remember him?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "Each has their own master, and each has their own beliefs. The two sides were once enemies. It is natural for you to kill me. I just want you to know that this old man is one of the two people in the world that I cannot see clearly." "Two people?" Haidang turned her head curiously. "Correct," Fan Xian said with a cautious expression. With a cautious expression, Fan Xian said, "Even if it's my emperor or your emperor, I can guess some of their thoughts and positions. Since they sit on the dragon chair, they must think about things related to this chair. However, Chun Ping Ping is different. As they say, having no desires makes one strong, and having tolerance is great. When a person is about to die, his words cannot be pondered. What exactly this old man wants to do and what he is doing, I cannot see clearly. Given his present position, There is absolutely no need for him to be involved in the fight for the throne. Regardless of who becomes the prince, he must be treated well. Furthermore, he has always been so calm. It does not match his way of doing things in his life. Chen Pingping was the most famous schemer in the world. For such a person, it was fine if he did not act. Once he did, it would flip the world upside down. Haidang thought for a moment, and then quietly said, "If you hadn't avoided me and explained clearly the relationship between your mother and Director Chun, I would certainly have a different view of this matter. Everyone in the world would probably think that Chen Pingping's high regard for you is completely because of the Qing Emperor's edict." "Correct. Through the things you've told me in the past, I seem to be able to see some unfavorable trends." Haidang smiled self-mockingly. "You want to support the third prince. Would Chen Pingping want to support you?" "It is too difficult," Fan Xian said with a frown. "There are some problems with my birth. If I don't sweep clean the nobles in the palace, I will not be able to enter the palace. Furthermore, who knows who is hiding behind the events of the past? I will figure this matter out one day. However, I can't rush it right now. As for what you said about the director's intentions," he smiled slightly and shook his head. "Being an emperor is not being a commissioner. For such an important matter, if he didn't inform me, he would not dare to do it alone." Haidang sank into deep thought. A moment later, she shook her head and sighed. "If I can't figure it out, then don't think about it for now. Jiangnan is only a small fish. Jingdo is the big fish." Fan Xian's eyes were calm as he stared at the two slightly undulating lines on the surface of the lake. After a long time, he said, "Fishing? I'm still worried whether I've caught a fish or if I've been dragged into the water by the fish and will never be able to climb back up." Haidang smiled and said, "You've long gotten your feet wet by the river. Even if you don't want to step into the water, it's impossible." Fan Xian smiled bitterly and said, "That's true. However, there's a sense of uncertainty. I don't like the feeling of having things that are not in my control. No one, not even the ruler of a country, can control everything," Haitang said quietly. "I just have to try my best to grasp the bigger picture. That is already good enough." Just now, you said there were two people you had never been able to see through. One was Chen Pingping. Who was the other? Haitang was very interested in this question. She knew that Fan Xian was very confident in his ability to read people. He could even grasp certain aspects of the Qing Emperor's thoughts. Yet he admitted there were people he could not see through. She very much wanted to know who the second person was. "My father," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "Actually, he is the same as Chen Pingping. They are both very powerful figures. However, Chen Pingping has always been bobbing up and down on the surface of the water, while he has always been at the bottom. Although I am his son, I do not know his true thoughts." Fan Xian treated Chen Pingping and Fan Jian as if they were his father. He was sincere and not suspicious. After his mother passed away, he took charge of vengeance. On the night of Jingdo's bloodshed 14 years ago, he cleanly washed the Empress's family in blood. Later, as he grew up, the care and love these two fathers gave him all made Fan Xian feel deep admiration. Strangely, it just so happened that the two people closest to him were the ones he could not see through the most. "So, what you've always been worried about is not Jiangnan, but Jingdo," Haitang smiled slightly. "With these two unfathomable figures behind you, you indeed do not need to worry about the Jiangnan matter. I am the whetstone the Emperor has set for those brothers." Fan Xian smiled slightly. "This Jiangnan matter, the eldest princess, the crown prince, and the second prince, are they not whetstone's father and Chen Pingping have set for me? The elders all have high hopes for me. I am very gratified." The word gratified was said with incomparable annoyance. The two thin fishing lines continued to sink steadily into the gentle surface of the water. There was not the slightest tremor caused by the wrist. Haiding glanced at him and said, "Looks like you indeed don't need to use fishing to train your nature." Fan Xian said, "My personality has always been firm and determined. My state of mind is calm. It is difficult for external things to haunt me." For Fan Xian, Admitting his good points in front of a woman was not embarrassing to blow his own trumpet. Rather, it was a very good self-analyzing attitude. Just how old are you now? Haitang asked curiously. She could not understand how such a young person could suddenly grasp great power in his hands and deal with the complicated affairs of one side and still maintain such a calm state of mind. Fan Xian replied very quickly and asked back, "How old are you this year?" Haitang pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright, making the blue lake in front of her lose its spirit. She refused to answer this question. Fan Xian huffed and said, "I turned 18 on the 8th of the new year." Haitang shook her head mockingly and said, "Looking at the way you usually do things, it's not like no one would believe you if you said you were 80. Old people had experienced the spring wind, summer rain, autumn frost, and winter snow. They had long seen everything in the world. That was why they could use a pair of seemingly indifferent eyes to see through everything in this world. Only because they had experienced it could they look down on it. Only then could they use the calmest state of mind and the most ruthless methods to face those seemingly unusually complicated situations. A necessary foundation for a schemer was that he had fewer desires. Thus, there were fewer openings that could be used by the enemy. Thus, from ancient times until now, those who were famous for scheming were either old men or old women or eunuchs. Young people were always hot-blooded, such as the second prince, the crown prince, and even the eldest princess. Thus, they would sometimes make unwise choices. For someone like Fan Xian, who had the experience of 2 lives, although he had been given a sorrowful 80-year-old label by Haitang, when he did things, he was indeed as patient as an old man. While using Xia Qifei to fight the family property lawsuit against the Ming family, the rest of the Overwatch Council remained silent. It was not until the storm of the family property lawsuit was about to die down that the Overwatch Council acted. For a moment, many officials of Jiangnan Road were politely invited to the 4th Bureau Inspection Office in Jiangnan Road to drink tea. Everyone knew that the Overwatch Council's tea was authentic Longjing tea. The fragrance of the tea filled the air, but no official wanted to drink it. Although not many of the Jiangnan Road officials were detained for the sake of Governor Xue Qing. During the process of drinking tea and chatting, the Overwatch Council would occasionally talk about some old matters that still made the officials tremble in fear. After they returned to their manners, they began to worry about their own futures and personal safety. Correspondingly, the officials who were reminded also noticed that they could no longer protect the Ming family too openly. On the other hand, the Overwatch Council also began to harass the Ming family's business. Although they could not directly seize people and seize goods, using the excuse of investigating Dongyi spies, within a day, the Ming family shops began to be inspected by the government. The Ming family's fleet also encountered unprecedented trouble while transporting goods. Although the Overwatch Council did not find any major evidence against the Ming family other than a few small crimes of carrying personal goods, under the repeated harassment, they successfully forced the Ming family's favored industrial system to slow down. What the business was particular about was the speed at which goods could be transported and converted into cash. It was like an endless river. Presently, the Overwatch Council was like countless grains of sand slowly sinking into the river. As the flow of the river slowed, the silt also settled down. It was originally a pool of running water, but now it gradually became muddy, making it difficult to move around. The Overwatch Council's actions used the least manpower and aroused the least discussion, but the results achieved were quite good. After the Ming family had paid the palace treasury's large amount of bidding silver, for the first time in many years, they felt their cash flow was stretched thin. Now, they were being harassed by the Overwatch Council. Their cash flow was becoming less and less, and they were forced to transfer silver from Taiping Money House. At the same time, the eldest branch, Ming Qingda, also began to secretly sign a bill of exchange from Zhaoshang Money House. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 380. For many years, The Ming family had lived and multiplied in the Jiangnan area. After decades of careful management and bold expansion by several generations of masters, they finally became one of the largest families in the world. Later, they climbed onto the eldest princess relationship and became a palace treasury royal merchant. Using the endless flow of silver brought by the palace treasury goods, the Ming family's hands and feet extended even further and deeper. Not only did they own countless businesses in Suzhou and Hangzhou, directly controlling large amounts of ships, carriages, and shops, but the family members also indirectly controlled many unremarkable businesses that were deeply connected to the people of Jiangnan. For example, grain, oil, meals, brothels. Some people even said that as soon as a Jiangnan person opened their door, they would certainly come into contact with the Ming family's businesses. For such a large family, the factions within the family were unusually complicated. However, the highest power was still held by the 6 sons of the 2 branches of the Ming family. The other, more distant branches were only responsible for managing the middle and lower level businesses. Because the old Ming matriarch deeply understood the danger of internal divisions in the family, the first arrangement she made after she took sole control of the Ming family was that other than the branch of the eldest branch, Ming Qingda, all of the other 5 Ming children only had the right to receive dividends. They had no power to make any arrangements or suggestions regarding the Ming family's enormous businesses. They were strictly forbidden from participating in the family business. This arrangement was, without question, a wise one. At least it used such a powerful method to ensure the Ming family's unity and good cooperation on the surface. It did not produce the same problems as other families. Until now, the family could still be considered to be unified against outsiders. Although they could not participate in the family business, the other 5 masters received the large dividends from the family every year. They could not hide so much silver under the blankets and give birth to little silver chicks. They had to use it to invest in the outside world. Naturally, they also did a lot of business in Jiangnan. The Ming family used this method to stretch their hands further and further. In the end, the businesses of these branches still had to cling onto the Ming family. If the Ming family fell, the businesses of the 5 masters would also have major problems. Thus, they had to use the power in their hands to protect and escort the eldest branch. Thus, in Fan Xian's eyes, these businesses that did not belong to the Ming family in name still had the Ming surname. Naturally, the Overwatch Council began to harass these businesses equally. This time, the 5 masters could not stand it. They thought to themselves that they did not receive many benefits from the family, and they were still implicated. The more they did business, the more difficult it became. What could they do? Open your dog eyes and look, it's the 4th master in front of you. The 4th master of the Ming family was born of a concubine. His position in the family was not high, so he always liked to walk birds for fun to avoid offending the old matriarch and big brother. Each year, he used the silver he earned to do some business. He opened a vegetable and fruit trading business and did some business that the official fingers missed. Naturally, his days passed very smoothly. But recently, no matter what, he couldn't be happy. The trading company was being investigated every day, and business was slightly declining. Although the results weren't too serious, the bad trend was clear. The officials who usually nodded and bowed in front of him were also rarely willing to drink tea with him. He understood that the Overwatch Council had been frightened by those officials. However, it was not up to the person in front of him to provoke him. A glimmer of viciousness flashed across the 4th master's slightly pale face. He slapped the southern barbarian in front of him until he spun 3 times in place. A red handprint suddenly appeared on his face, and a trickle of blood flowed from the corner of his lips. The 4th master of the Ming family was the largest vegetable and fruit seller in Suzhou. He didn't look like much, but he had a monopoly on 30% of the Jiangnan fruit business. Including the matters of income to the palace, he single-handedly took care of it. There was no problem in calling him the King of Melons. Furthermore, he relied on the Ming family's power to establish his own guild and take care of the entire Jiangnan fruit market. In all these years, There had never been a powerful figure who dared to come to his fields to pick some fruits to eat. However, a merchant had suddenly come from Lingnan and jumped over the agreement between the Ming and Xiong families. Without going through the fourth master's hands, he directly sold fruits to Suzhou. Lingnan's weather was hot and the fruit was beautiful. As long as the problem of long-distance transportation was solved, there would be great profits to be made. If that merchant had understood the rules, he would have first paid his respects to the fourth master after coming to Suzhou. Perhaps the fourth master would have nodded his head and given him some shares to do business. Who knew whether this merchant didn't understand the rules, or if he had something he could rely on? He relied on the fact that he had a lot of goods and a low price to forcefully lower the price of melons in Suzhou and even Jiangnan by 20% within 10 days. This merchant's business also rapidly expanded. The fourth master's face was full of a sinister smile as he stared at the Lingnan merchant he had slapped to the ground. He chuckled and said, "Now who dares to bully the Ming family? A mere southern barbarian. Where did you get the courage?" In reality, he knew that when his family's business began to be suppressed by the Overwatch Council, no matter how useful the Overwatch Council could be, once this kind of news spread and the trend took shape, countless merchant powers that had been suppressed by his family in the past would begin to stir. They would want to take advantage of the Ming family being badly battered to take advantage of the opportunity to gain some benefits. However, the fourth master could not do anything to Imperial Envoy Fan Xian. He didn't even have the time to be afraid. How could he allow a southern barbarian to mess around on his territory? Use a stick to teach him a lesson. The fourth master looked at the Lingnan melon merchant crying and begging for mercy on the ground. A glimmer of disdain flashed across the corner of his lips. As his voice fell, a wretched cry rang out again from the yard. The fourth master's subordinates held wooden sticks and smashed them viciously toward the Lingnan melon merchant's body. The blows rang out. Who knew how many of the poor merchant's bones had been broken? The wretched cries gradually quieted. His entire body was covered in blood as he was knocked unconscious. To the side, the trusted accountant's heart trembled as he watched this bloody scene. He moved closer and said, "Fourth master, this person should be someone from the Xiong family." "I know," the fourth master said in a severe voice. "Xiong Bailing, that old bastard, wants to use this melon merchant to test us. If I don't retaliate, he will actually think that the Ming family is easy to bully." The accountant smiled bitterly and said, "Fourth master, at this time of year, we can't bring trouble to the family." The fourth master thought of something and his expression darkened. "The old matriarch is already beginning to suspect me. If I don't act rash right now, what should I do?" Countless complicated emotions welled up in the accountant's heart. He didn't know what to say. The fourth master stood up from his chair and gazed at the blood-covered Lingnan merchant on the ground. In a dark voice, he said, "It's not that I won't let you do business, but doing business is not bullying people. You can't bully me." The Lingnan merchant had already woken up. Hearing these words, he was quite frightened and quickly nodded his head furiously. "Hand over 10,000 liang of silver. At the same time, bring the price back down. Let's compete fairly." The fourth master chuckled. His laughter was incomparably dark and severe. "You won't bully me, so naturally, I won't bully you." After dealing with this person, the fourth master called for people to drag the merchant out. Looking at the bloodstains on the floor, he spat and cursed through gritted teeth. "Fan Xian bullied me, and I didn't retaliate. Who the F***CK is the Xiong family?" Returning to the room, the fourth master washed his hands and rolled up his sleeves. He took down the bird cage from the side of the corridor and began to play with it. He whistled, but his gaze was distant. The accountant followed behind him timidly and said in a low voice, "Fourth master, you're saying the matter of you meeting with Xia Qifei has been found out by the old matriarch?" The fourth master's body froze. Suddenly, he cursed angrily. "Isn't it all your rotten idea? You said to have a foot in two boats, that the seventh Ming master had survived a great disaster, that he was bound to have good fortune in the future, and that he had the imperial envoy's support. The public property would eventually be taken back by him. You wanted me to meet him and speak first. F***CK. The next day, I was called over by the old matriarch to be scolded and almost didn't come out alive. He was incomparably angry. With great difficulty, he calmed the emotions in his chest and coldly said, "The Overwatch Council has been targeting our family recently. If I wasn't more vicious today, how would the old matriarch and big brother see me?" The accountant didn't dare to breathe loudly after being scolded by his master. With a sullen face, he said, "But Master Xia wanted to meet with you that day, and you had to refuse." Fourth Master, you really don't want to hear what Master Xia said? Seventh brother. The fourth master thought of his younger brother who had suddenly appeared and felt it was strange. Concerning the matter of Xia Qifei and his mother being harmed by the old Ming matriarch, he had only occasionally heard about it. He and his mother were clean, so he was not afraid of the other party like the eldest branch. Thinking of the words Xia Qifei had conveyed to the imperial envoy that day, a light flashed through his eyes. He sighed helplessly and said, "I'm afraid of the imperial envoy, but I'm even more afraid of the old matriarch. Furthermore, the Ming family is, after all, our Ming family. If they really listened to you and joined hands with Xia Qifei, with such a terrifying imperial envoy watching from behind, the Ming family would become the court's Ming family." The fourth master smiled wretchedly and said, "No matter how tyrannical the eldest branch is, we have been brothers for so many years. In the end, my surname is still Ming." The accountant didn't dare to continue persuading. The fourth master had officially rejected the good intentions Fan Xian had conveyed through Xia Qifei. Thus, the response from Hua Garden quickly arrived at the large manor he had bought in the south of Suzhou. The Suzhou government bailiffs pushed open the door and entered. Under the watchful gaze of the Ming family thugs, they trembled as they arrived at the Tang family home. They took out the notice and requested that the fourth master follow them back to the Suzhou government for a hearing. The fourth master had not expected that he would also be taken in for questioning. He yelled at the bailiffs in a stern voice, "Are you confused? Who is reporting me? What are you reporting me for?" The bailiffs had no choice. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, how would he dare to offend the true fourth master of the Ming family? Usually, he wished he could kneel on the ground and lick the other's boots. The bailiffs forced a smile and sent a gaze toward the fourth master, indicating that there was someone behind him. He lowered his voice and pleaded, "It is a Lingnan merchant. He is reporting that the fourth master of the Ming family is tyrannizing the market, injuring people, and allowing slaves to commit murder." The fourth master paused and furrowed his brows. He had not thought that the Lingnan merchant would dare to report him. Furthermore, he had not thought that the Suzhou government would accept this case. It had already been many years. The Ming family was special in Jiangnan. The Suzhou government had such a close relationship with the Ming family. How could they accept the Lingnan merchant's complaint? Although the Overwatch Council had recently been playing with the Ming family, the Overwatch Council's biggest problem was that they could not interfere with local government affairs. They also could not directly interfere with civil affairs. The Overwatch Council could not take the lead in such criminal cases. Thus, when he allowed slaves to commit murder earlier, he had not been too worried. However, the Suzhou government had actually sent someone. His gaze passed over the head of the bailiffs and saw an unfamiliar court official standing behind a few officials. Looking at the official's robes, the rank was not high. Furthermore, it did not look like the clothing of the court system. His eyes narrowed and guessed the other party's identity. From the moment the Lingnan merchant entered the courtyard, all of this had been watched by Overwatch Council officials. No wonder the other party had reacted so quickly. The fourth master's eyelids twitched. He knew he had miscalculated one thing. Although the Overwatch Council could not directly interrogate him, they could keep an eye on the Suzhou government. If the Suzhou government truly ignored him, the Overwatch Council would probably capture the Suzhou government officials and bring them back for questioning. With such a powerful deterrent here, no wonder the Suzhou government dared to capture him today. He laughed coldly and gazed at the bailiffs. "So what if I don't go?" The bailiffs were so anxious he was about to cry. He pleaded, "Fourth master, at least give the Zhizhou some face." The Ming family servants all began to clamor. Holding wooden sticks in their hands, they surrounded the bailiffs in the middle. Their cold gazes, intentionally or not, stared at the Overwatch Council official at the back of the crowd. The fourth bureau official of the Overwatch Council smiled slightly and said, "Brothers, what exactly are you planning to do? There seems to be someone here preparing to rebel. Beating up officials and not listening to court orders. What was the difference between this and rebellion?" Hearing these words, the Suzhou government official knew that this person had to be captured and brought back today. Otherwise, the Zhizhou would not be able to answer to the Overwatch Council. The Lingnan merchant's wretched state had already been seen by people in the court. Furthermore, people from Hua Garden had also come and were drinking tea in the tea shop opposite the court. None of their actions could be hidden from the imperial envoy's eyes. The official steeled his heart and looked at the fourth master and said, "Fourth master, please." He used his gaze to endlessly signal to the other party to let him understand that now was not the same as in the past. When it was time to submit first. As for after he was taken into the Suzhou government, naturally, there would be a chance to turn things around. The fourth master lowered his head slightly and muttered to himself for a long time, forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart. He also understood what the situation was and nodded his head. The official let out a big breath and sighed. "Fourth master, pity me." The young Overwatch Council official of the Fourth Bureau looked at this scene with a cold smile from the back. The accounts master moved closer to the fourth master's side and worriedly said, "Fourth master, what do we do?" The fourth master laughed sinisterly and smashed the birdcage in his hand onto the ground, shattering it. Bird feathers flew chaotically, and bird blood splattered everywhere. He smiled coldly and said, "So be it. All these years, I've only had tea in the back garden of the Suzhou government. I haven't had the opportunity to see the true appearance of the Suzhou prison. Today, I'll go and open my eyes." He lowered his voice and hurriedly said, "Immediately send a message back to Ming Garden. Have Big Brother bail me out. Don't worry, the old matriarch will trust me even more because of this matter." After giving his orders, the fourth master of the Ming family was, for the first time in his life, invited back to the prison of the Suzhou government. Looks like fourth brother doesn't have any other intentions. After the news was sent back to Ming Garden, Ming Qingda sent people to open up the channels while he walked into the quiet courtyard his mother lived in. He reported to the old matriarch sitting on the chair, "I'll go and bring him back right now." Although a Lingnan merchant was injured and the Suzhou government is under pressure from the Overwatch Council to bring him back, the matter is not big. There shouldn't be any future trouble. Sir Fan Jr. will not be able to use this matter to bite fourth brother to death. On the chair, the old Ming matriarch sank into silence. Her old and sunken eyes were closed as if she was thinking about something. She still did not reply to Ming Qingda's words. Ming Qingda felt it was strange. A moment later, a chill surged through him. The old Ming matriarch slowly opened her listless eyes and said, "The Ming family is already in a precarious situation. Fourth brother first met with Xia Qifei in secret. This is disloyalty. Later, he acted rashly and caused the family to worry about him. This is unfilial. Such a disloyal and unfilial person. Why protect him?" After Ming Qingda's silence, he became sorrowful again. The Ming family's predetermined strategy against Fan Xian's aggressive attacks was to retreat in order to advance and play with sadness. That was why he had knelt in the palace treasury and fallen ill afterward. Presently, the Overwatch Council was threatening fiercely. The Ming family was trembling and appeared very pitiful. However, the old Ming matriarch's intention seemed to be to open an even deeper wound on her family's wound. He took a deep breath and calmly said, "Presently, the situation is still within our grasp. Sir Fan Jr. can only walk on the periphery and cannot hold on to our true weakness. At this time, there is no need to sacrifice so much. After all, he is of the Ming family's blood." The old Ming matriarch glanced at him coldly and emotionlessly. The imperial envoy will push harder and harder. In the end, we will need to sacrifice someone we can bring out in exchange for the sympathy of the Jiangnan people and the inclination of the gentry under heaven. Now that fourth brother has been taken into prison, isn't this the best opportunity? If people know that the imperial envoy forced an old master of the Ming family to death for money, the court will be shocked. We will receive a lot of benefits in time. This transaction is worth it. Ming Qingda's expression did not change. He thought for a moment and then said, "It's all as mother wishes." He knew that his fourth brother was, after all, the concubine's son. In his mother's eyes, he was a dispensable figure. The old Ming matriarch gazed at him coldly and said, "Is the family's cash flow this bad? Why do you often have to transfer money from Zhaoshang recently?" Ming Qingda smiled coldly in his heart and thought, Taiping Money House's seal has always been in your hands. If I want to truly hold the Ming family in my hands, how can I not think of other ways? Although he thought this in his heart, his mouth warmly explained a few things. The old Ming matriarch nodded and finally slowly said, "Only fourth brother is probably not enough for the hearts of the people under heaven to lean toward the Ming family. Qingda, you have to be prepared. Perhaps you will be forced to give up the position of master of the Ming family. Only then will the people under heaven realize the tragic state of the Ming family." Ming Qingda was slightly startled. He bowed deeply and left the room. Outside the courtyard, he smiled slightly at his son, Ming Lanshi, who had been waiting for him the entire time. "Did you hear that? I already said, the one she loves the most is only your sixth uncle. Yesterday, I wrote Fan Xian's birthday incorrectly. My apologies. I'm not in a good mood, so I don't talk much. I also didn't reply to some of my book friends on QQ. Please forgive me." To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 381. Fan Xian did not know what was happening inside the Ming family. For him, the Ming family was a rock. He had to suppress it, but temporarily could not crush it. In any case, he had the patience. There was no rush in fishing. That day, he came to the Suzhou branch of the Baiwa brothel. The business in the brothel had already picked up. The girls upstairs and downstairs were busy receiving customers. Not many people noticed the male owner and female shopkeeper respectfully protecting a person as they quietly went up to the top floor. Pushing open the window and looking out, he saw many workers digging mud to expand the lake. To expand a lake, the amount of money and labor needed was not a small amount. He couldn't resist sighing and asking, "Is there a need?" Sure Chomley smiled slightly and said, "According to Sir's intentions, the plans and layout of the branch were sent urgently to the north. The day before yesterday, the second young master's intention was that this lake is too small and the terrain is not open enough. The customers who come to play will feel a bit cramped, so it is better to put in a lot of effort and dig the lake a few hundred meters forward." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. It looked like Xijia, who was far away in northern Qi, still had Baiwa brothel on his mind. For such a large undertaking, he only had to say one word, yet Fan Xian had to mobilize many people to do it. "There's sound and smell. Aren't you afraid it will affect business? It's surrounded by green cloth. Customers in the building usually won't notice that side. Although business is good right now, if we want to dig the lake, we can only do it now. Otherwise, when spring is at its peak and summer is at its peak, it will be inconvenient to dig at that time." Fan Xian nodded and didn't say anything. He trusted his brother's business acumen. Today, he had come to Baiwa brothel mainly to find out some information. He looked at the file his subordinate had delivered and furrowed his brows. Where exactly did the Ming family housekeeper escape to? The Ming family housekeeper had the same surname as the housekeeper Fan Xian had beaten in Danzhou when he was a child. They were both surnamed Zhou. This person was not simple. After all these years, he had been the old Ming matriarch's trusted aide and was responsible for managing the accounts of the mysterious Juanshan Conference. After Xia Qifei was assassinated by the Juanshan Conference in front of the Jiangnan restaurant, The Overwatch Council had begun to secretly investigate the housekeeper's whereabouts. They were prepared to secretly arrest him at any moment and wanted to obtain some key information from his mouth. However, that housekeeper Zhou seemed to have disappeared within a day and did not appear in any of the Ming family property. No one knew if the Jiangnan road officials were helping him hide or something. In any case, even the Overwatch Council's methods had not been able to find a trace of his whereabouts. Deng Ziyu walked in from outside and reported to Fan Xian the matter of the fourth Ming master being taken into the Suzhou government. Hearing Fan Xian ask about housekeeper Zhou's whereabouts, he couldn't help but furrow his brows. He was responsible for this matter. After so many days without any progress, he also felt ashamed. He furrowed his brows and shook his head. He thought for a moment and said, if he hadn't been silenced by the Ming family, then it should be, there is a high possibility that the other party is openly hiding in the Ming garden, Fan Xian said. Fan Xian knew that if he really wanted to hide the account master of the Juanshan conference, hiding him in the Ming garden was the riskiest and safest method. He couldn't resist smiling. Do I really have to go into the Ming garden to capture him? Deng Ziyu forced a smile and said, without concrete evidence, how can we enter the palace to capture him? The other party is also someone with a hereditary noble title. Furthermore, if we make the matter too serious, the governor will certainly be forced to open his mouth and pressure you. Fan Xian sighed and felt that this matter was gradually losing its fun. He waved his hand and said, if we charge in and can't capture him, it won't be easy to explain to Xueqing. If we can confirm that there is someone inside, we could try being barbaric for once. I just can't confirm it, Deng Ziyu said helplessly. The two of them were chatting when suddenly an Overwatch Council spy carefully knocked on the door. Deng Ziyu glanced at Fan Xian and walked out the door to say something in a low voice. His expression immediately became serious. He gave a few more reminders in a low voice and then quickly turned around. Leaning close to Fan Xian's ear, he said, there's news from the island. Fan Xian's spirits rose. That damn pirate dock had been quiet for so long. He almost thought that he could no longer use that little island to deal with the Ming family. Hearing that there was news, he said with great interest, speak. Deng Ziyu glanced at him again and carefully said, the people on the island are all dead. Completely dead. With a slap, Fan Xian slammed his palm against the tea table beside him without expression. The tea table did not shatter, nor did the teacup break. However, this slap clearly expressed his dissatisfaction and dissatisfaction. The Ming family had acted ruthlessly and cleanly. He furrowed his brows and asked, where are our people? The Overwatch Council had a spy on the island. Fan Xian was worried about his life and death. Deng Ziyu said, his luck is pretty good. He survived. The Chuanzhou side found their way to the island and just happened to pick him up. Fan Xian's expression was slightly heavy. What is his name? Qinghua. Where is he? Just arrived in Suzhou. He is recovering in a secret residence. Let's go. Qinghua felt that he was dreaming. He had been dreaming these few days. After the island had been surrounded by the soldiers, only he had survived. Surrounded by the sky full of pirate gulls and the ground full of dead bodies, he had tried to find the path his leader had once left behind. He had gone to that hidden little cove and found a boat to go out to sea. He had not thought that the Ming family would be so ruthless in silencing him. All the boats on the island had been destroyed. Even the three-sail fast boats the pirate leader had hidden had sunk to the bottom of the water. Looking at the sails that had changed color after being soaked in the water, Qinghua felt a bit hopeless. The island was isolated beyond the sea. If the Chuanzhou side discovered that the situation had changed and took the risk to send people to the island again, it would still take a long time. He had been alone on the island without water or food these days. Could he survive? The spies of the 2nd and 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council had to undergo harsh wilderness survival training and intelligence gathering training from the beginning of their admission. It was only because of this skill that the single Qinghua had managed to survive on the island. There was no water on the island. Fortunately, it had rained. There were no wild animals on the island, but there were corpses. There were pirate gulls that ate the corpses and there were fish and clams in the sea. Thus, he was still strong and disgustingly able to survive. It was not until his colleagues from Chuanzhou took the risk to go to the island again that the extremely weak Qing Hua was finally lifted onto the boat. The boat floated back to the mainland. Qing was finally able to have a good sleep. In his dreams, he thought of the water birds he had eaten and the rotting human flesh in the stomachs of those water islands. Qing Hua still couldn't help but have nightmares. He slept for a long time, from Chuanzhou all the way to Suzhou. When he woke up, he found there was a young and delicate official in front of him looking at him with admiration and pity. The Overwatch Council official beside him reminded him, "It's the commissioner." The commissioner? Qing Hua was startled and struggled to get up and bow. Fan Xian quickly stopped him on the bed and narrowed his eyes slightly. Looking at this Qing Kingdom version of Liu Binshuan, a sigh and admiration welled up in his heart. Political struggles were not treating people to a meal. It was a matter of life and death. However, it was often the lower-level officials who needed to be sacrificed. Fan Xian took out a pill and fed it to him. He then used a golden needle to help him circulate his blood. After carefully treating him for a long time, he confirmed that there wouldn't be too many sequelae and that the other party had enough energy to speak. Only then did he begin to ask questions. In their conversation, Fan Xian obtained a lot of useful information. There is a lot of information that had not been sent ashore in time, such as the connection between the pirate leader and Ming Launcher's concubine. He coldly said, "No wonder that concubine would suddenly return home to visit relatives. I'm afraid she has long sunk into the river to feed the tortoises. Marrying a tortoise, in the end, she can only feed the tortoises. She is also a pitiful person. Ziyu, immediately send people to the concubine's home to investigate. I want to see how Ming Launcher is going to explain." Qing Hua had also painstakingly kept a copy of the letter. This was also a very solid piece of evidence. Although the Ming family could still deny it, they could always use this to make an issue of it. "Do you have any thoughts about the soldiers who came to the island?" Fan Xian stared into Qing Hua's eyes and asked. Although he knew that it had not been easy for him to survive on the island, and he had experienced a long journey once on land, and was extremely weak, he had no choice but to ask clearly. This reality was like a thorn in his heart and made him wary. That group of sailors was clearly a helper for the Ming family and had been sent by the eldest princess. Fan Xian wanted to know just who in the military was standing on the eldest princess' side. Presumably, the emperor was also very interested in this matter. It could not be Yin Xiaoyi. Although Yin Xiaoyi was the Qing Kingdom's northern governor with his superior 9th-level status, his military power had always been closely watched by the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian knew that Yin Xiaoyi did not have much power in the Navy. Back then, the Chuanzhou Navy was the strongest naval force of the imperial court. Deng Ziyu glanced at Fan Xian and quietly said, "However, after the Yi family matter, in order to clear away the Yi family's influence in the Chuanzhou Navy, the court reduced the Chuanzhou Navy into 3. Presently, the Jiangnan Navy's nominally main yamen is in Shazhou. You should have met with the officials there. To enter the sea from Shazhou and land on the island to kill people, the distance is too far. Furthermore, the voyage is all on the Yangtze River. It is easy to reveal traces. In my opinion, it shouldn't be them." Fan Xian nodded. He did not have any emotional fluctuations because of the words Yi family. He turned his head to look at Qing Hua. On the bed, Qing Hua's lips had white bubbles forming on them. He was also trying hard to remember the soldier who had landed on the island that night. He knew this matter was very important and could allow the council to determine just who dared to be in cahoots with the pirates. With great difficulty, he opened his mouth and said, "When the official ship landed on the island, it was just before dawn. There were many reefs around the island. Under such a dark sky, to be able to forcefully land on the island, it should be a professional navy and not a soldier on shore borrowing a ship. I once saw the face of a soldier, clearly. Looking at the contours of his face, he should be someone from the north." Fan Xian's brows furrowed. Could it be Dong Yi's navy? Qing Hua shook his head with difficulty and reported, "They occasionally opened their mouths to speak, but it was not a Dong Yi accent." Fan Xian gazed at Deng Ziyu and saw the glimmer of unease in each other's hearts. The Qing kingdom had three great navies. In the north was the Jiaozhou Navy, stationed near Shandong Road, and had great power. If the other party was a capable general on the eldest princess side, then the power the eldest princess held in the military was much more powerful than they had previously imagined. In Fan Xian's heart, since the emperor had always been stingy in letting him hold a sliver of military power and had always appeared so confident and arrogant, he believed that the majority of the power of the Qing kingdom's military was in the emperor's hands. Under such a premise, Fan Xian would have more confidence when he did things. Now, he had suddenly discovered that the eldest princess and the prince's power had increased by leaps and bounds. How could Fan Xian not be wary? The Yi family would gradually lean toward the second prince, the northern governor Yin Xiaoi. And now, there was another navy. Whose people are the Jiaozhou Navy? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and asked. Deng Ziyu lowered his voice and said, the admiral of the navy is a first-level military general. Naturally, he doesn't have to listen to Yin Xiaoi's orders. I've never felt that he has any inclinations. After all, he comes from the Qin family, but his relationship with Yi Zhong's faction is not bad. Fan Xian gently tightened his fist and shook his head. He didn't say anything more. Looking at the tired Qing Hua on the bed, a faint smile rose to his face. Recover well. After you recover, follow me and do things. He greatly admired this young Overwatch Council official who was able to hide on the pirate island and successfully survive. Such an outstanding talent should become his trusted aide. Qingmo was shocked. He had not expected that after his narrow escape, he would have such good luck. For a moment, he froze on the bed, not knowing what to say. It was not until Fan Xian led the Qinian unit out of the room and the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council's Inspection Division stationed in Xuanzhou smiled and congratulated him that he came to his senses. He knew he had finally made it. The nightmare had finally woken up. Fan Xian was a bit angry. Everything he had encountered today was not good news. It looked like he had to quickly send the council report back to Jingdou and have the old cripple be more spirited and not always stay in Chun Garden looking at beautiful women. If your successor ran into a problem, you had to solve it, right? Sir, there's good news. Just as Fan Xian was silently cursing his bad luck, Deng Ziyu suppressed a glimmer of joy and respectfully reported. What news? That accountant of the Juanshan conference, we have the whereabouts of him. Where is he? Sir is wise. The news is accurate. That person is in Ming Garden. Fan Xian pressed his palms together and sighed. Finally, there's something to do. Not in a good mood. Not in a good state. Write less. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www. See him if you. Come. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 382. In the middle of April, the feeling of spring was bright and beautiful. All of Jiangnan was enveloped in a warm wind. The people walking on the streets were already beginning to only wear lined clothes. Outside Jingdou, thousands of miles away from Suzhou, one could still see the patch of white snow on top of the Tsang Mountain from a long distance. It was as cold as the white cloth covering the face of a corpse. The tall man wearing the straw hat withdrew his gaze from the white snow on top of the Tsang Mountain and silently drank the remaining tea in his cup. He ordered a bowl of plain noodles and began to eat without much taste. This place was 30 li outside of Jingdou. It was called Sherpai Village. This tall man wearing the straw hat was the second priest of the Qing temple who had traveled with great difficulty from Jiangnan to Jingdou, Great Master Sanshur. Great Master Sanshur had not come to the capital to discuss the Tao or to pluck the willows outside the imperial road. He had come to kill. He had come to assassinate the emperor. Although Fan Xian had intentionally or unintentionally let him leave in Jiangnan, the Overwatch Council's investigation was strict. Even though the Northwest Road had not been heavily guarded, it still took Sanshur a great deal of time to get around the Overwatch Council and Black Knight's blockade and come to Jingdou. The Juanshan Conference was indeed a loose organization. However, Once this organization possessed an unusually sacred and important mission, its importance became apparent. Not many people knew just how many important figures of the powers in the world were gathered by this mysterious organization. Although Great Master Sanshur was honored as the second priest of the Qing Temple, he did not have much power to speak in the Juanshan Conference. Furthermore, he was personally opposed to the Juanshan Conference's arrangements in Jiangnan. After his unsuccessful attempts to interfere with Fan Xian's administration, Great Master Sanshur made himself a sacrificial pawn and broke away from the Juanshan Conference's arrangements. Alone with great ambitions and a red sun hidden in his heart, he proudly headed to Jingdou. He was going to Jingdou to kill people that could not be killed. As he thought this, he silently ate his noodles. Following his elder brother's earnest teachings, he chewed each noodle carefully and slowly until it became a paste. Only then did he swallow it with satisfaction. For some reason, Great Master Sanshur ate with sorrow and found it difficult to control himself. 2 muddy tears slid down from his old eyes and dripped into the noodle soup. He was going to enter the capital to ask the emperor why. After finishing the noodles, he put on the bamboo hat to cover his face. He picked up the wooden staff that was as tall as a person and left the noodle shop. Following the small path at the foot of Sherpai village, he began to walk in the direction of the capital. In front of them was the dark imperial city, and behind them was the pure white mountain. The ascetic monks were walking in the middle. The forest grew deeper and the road narrower. It was still early, so there were no woodcutters diligently getting up to chop firewood. It was also impossible for any pedestrians to pass by in the wilderness. The mountain road was quiet, so quiet that it was a little strange. There was not even the sound of birds or insects. After all, Great Master Sanshur was not a warrior skilled in assassination. He was just an ascetic monk with a very high cultivation. Although he felt it was a little strange, he did not pay it much attention. The court and the Juanshan Conference should not know that he had come from Jiangnan to Jingdou. The only person who knew of this matter was the northern Qi saint girl, Haidang. No matter how one looked at it was impossible for Haidang to reveal his whereabouts. Great Master Sanshur believed this very much. He did not think that anyone would know his path in advance and set up an ambush ahead of time. Thus, when that mournful and deadly arrow shot out of the dense forest and viciously pierced into his eye socket, Great Master Sanshur felt very surprised. The way the arrow flew was very strange. At the beginning, it was silent, like a ghost or a demon. Only when it was only 3 feet away from his face did it suddenly let out a shrill whistle. The whistling sound of the arrow was enough to take away one's soul, incomparably terrifying. Hiss! Roar! The long black arrow seemed to cry out the word kill. Great Master Sanshur gave a muffled grunt. His long wooden staff stabbed viciously into the ground. The head of the staff, carved into the shape of a bird's head, stretched forward in a very short time and blocked the arrow that seemed to have flown from the sky. With a muffled sound, the arrow shot viciously into the head of the wooden staff. The boundless power contained in the arrow shook Great Master Sanshur's wrist slightly. In an instant, the bird's head carved on the head of the staff exploded. Great Master Sanshur narrowed his eyes. A chill rose in his heart. It seemed that only the governor of the north, Yin Xiaoi, had such a lightning-fast archery skill. Yin Xiaoi should be in Sangzhou at this time, thousands of li from Jingdou. Separated by the leaves in the forest, Great Master Sanshur's clear eyes saw clearly the archer's face. It was a young and unfamiliar face. He knew that the arrow he had personally received must have been taught by Yin Xiaoi. This unfamiliar young man must be Yin Xiaoi's disciple. While he was thinking of these things, Great Master Sanshur had already used the rebound of the staff to fly into the air. Like a large bird, he spread his body. Holding the wooden staff in his hand, he smashed it like a mad demon. Although he didn't know why the other person wanted to kill him, before he entered Jingdou and asked the emperor that question, he would not allow himself to die. Great Master Sanshur's figure was tall and sturdy. He wore a straw hat on his head. His staff was full of murderous intent. His entire body floated in the air like a vicious large bird, filled with an aura of no return. When fighting against a godly archer, the most important thing was to close the distance between them. However, leaping into the air and exposing all of one's openings to the opponent, and one had nowhere to borrow strength from in the air, it was even more difficult to dodge those ghostly arrows. Great Master Sanshur swept over and looked at the archer's calm face. He knew that the other party wanted to take the opportunity to shoot. As expected, the archer didn't know how to move. His hands flashed, and he had already taken out an arrow from behind him, knocked it, took aim, and fired. These were 3 simple actions, but they were completed naturally, harmoniously, and quickly. It was as if they were inseparable actions. It was very beautiful. This kind of simple beauty came from his daily hard practice and talent in archery. With a whoosh, the second arrow shot toward Great Master Sanshur's throat. At this moment, he was in the air and had no way of dodging such a swift arrow. However, Sanshur had been waiting for this moment. He gave a muffled grunt and did not dodge. He circulated his junshi to his abdomen and used his stupidest and most powerful iron shirt to forcefully block this arrow. The arrow hit his throat and made a strange gurgling sound. A strange light flashed through Great Master Sanshur's eyes. His entire body had already charged toward the archer and struck out with his staff. At this moment, there was only 3 feet between the two of them. How could the archer dodge? The archer's expression was still calm. Facing the crazed staff, he steadily took 2 steps back. Holding his longbow in front of his body, he spat out one word from his mouth, seal. For golden knives came out of nowhere and turned into 4 streams of light, sealing Great Master Sanshur's killing blow. A loud explosion rang out. The knives shattered, the staff was in chaos, and a cloud of dust filled the forest. Amidst the dust filling the air, the sound of an arrow rang out again. A soul-stealing arrow pierced through the dust and the forest. In a very short distance, it once again shot toward Great Master Sanshur's throat. The distance was too close. Great Master Sanshur had no time to dodge, and he didn't dare let his weakest throat be continuously tested by the Yin family's archery skills. Thus, he raised his palm and took a saluting posture. The other party had used 4 knives to seal his staff, so he would use 1 palm to seal this arrow. That slender, soul-eating arrow nailed itself to the edge of Great Master Sanshur's thick and calloused palm. It was like a mosquito staring at a pitiful person's flesh. It swayed a few times before landing on the ground. It was only a very light sting, a nail. Great Master Sanshur's body began to sway violently. He was shaken by this arrow and took a step back. Another arrow arrived. Great Master Sanshur raised his palm again, sealed, and retreated again. The arrows shooting out of the dust grew faster and faster. It was as if they would never stop. Who knew what kind of terrifying hand speed the archer behind the dust had? If so, there were 9 arrows. Great Master Sanshur was shaken back 9 steps and forced back to the side of the mountain path by those terrifying arrows. He gave a muffled grunt, and junshi flowed through his arms. With a wave of his long staff, he sent the last arrow flying. Then he felt his feet tighten. A terrifying animal trap made a gurgling sound and clamped down on his right foot. This animal trap was so big that it was probably used to trap tigers. Even though Great Master Sanshur had the unbreakable power of the iron shirt, suddenly encountering a trap, the flesh on his calf still split open and blood spurted out. Great Master Sanshur let out a pained cry. He furrowed his unwilling brows tightly. There was also a small spot of blood on his throat. The hand holding the wooden staff also had many small spots of blood slowly seeping out. With so many unpredictable and sharp arrows, if it had been anyone else, they would have long been shot into a porcupine. Only he had not suffered any true injuries. Unfortunately, in the end, he was still forced into the trap by these arrows. The dust gradually settled. In the opposite forest, the face of the young archer once again appeared, along with 4 knife-wielding men. Great Master Sanshur looked coldly at the other party and said, I didn't think it would be you who killed." Before he finished speaking, the young archer had come to silence him and had no interest in conversing with Great Master Sanshur. Although he knew that Great Master Sanshur was also a legendary figure, the younger generation had grown up and did not have much reverence in their hearts. The young man used the steady fingers of his right hand to place the poisoned arrow on the bowstring. Once again, he aimed at the throat of the immobile Great Master Sanshur. "Shoot!" As he spoke, the arrow in his hand did not leave the bowstring. The forest was in chaos. Countless archers surged out from all directions. Separated by a distance of dozens of feet, they surrounded Sanshur in the center. They all held bows and arrows in their hands. Following the word "shoot," countless long arrows left the bowstring. They transformed into soul-stealing straight lines and viciously pierced toward Great Master Sanshur's body in the center. Sanshur's pupils constricted slightly. Looking at the other party's arrangement, he knew that he might not survive today. To be able to arrange so many archers in the mountain, they must be people from the military. No matter how powerful an ace, when faced with the merciless and cold-blooded attacks of the military, they would not be able to survive. Furthermore, his right foot had already been caught in that hateful beast trap. He was not Yiluyin or Kuhi. Great Master Sanshur sighed in his heart and waved the long staff in his hand, blocking the rain of arrows coming from all directions. Clang, 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 countless shattering sounds rang out around his body. In just a moment, hundreds of flying arrows had been shattered by his wooden staff. The broken arrows piled up around his body. It looked unusually sad. Some arrows pierced through his defensive circle and stuck into his body. However, these archers were not as good as the young man earlier and were unable to pierce through Great Master Sanshur's iron shirt. The leading young archer was not in a hurry. He only looked coldly at Great Master Sanshur, who was struggling like a dying beast. He watched this ascetic monk helplessly fight against the sky full of arrows. He knew that the other party's Jinshi was strong. If he wanted to kill him from a distance, he needed to be patient and continue to waste time. As long as Sanshur's Jinshi showed the slightest sign of waning, he would not be able to maintain his ability to stab. Once the arrows entered his body, that would be the time of Sanshur's death. Thus, he only aimed at Sanshur's throat and coldly waited for that moment. The dozens of archers in the forest only coldly and endlessly shot arrows. Sanshur howled loudly and endlessly waved his wooden staff, struggling in the rain of arrows. Eventually, there would come a time when his strength was exhausted. At this moment, Sanshur's bravery and might looked so sad. Faced with powerful military machines, what use was a martial ace? What a cruel scene it was. The merciless shooting continued. The broken arrows piled higher and higher in Great Master Sanshur's body. Gradually, they went past his calf and completely submerged the animal trap and injured leg in the arrows. It looked like a self-immolating monk who was endlessly chopping at the pile of firewood that was about to ignite himself. Great Master Sanshur's clothes were already soaked with sweat. The speed at which he waved his wooden staff had also slowed. It was clear that his Jinshi was not as abundant as before. It was this opportunity that the leading archer, who had been waiting for a long time, gently released his middle finger. The arrow on the bowstring shot out. With a swoosh, the entire forest and the entire world seemed to have quieted down in an instant. Great Master Sanshur held the arrow in his throat. His mouth made gurgling sounds, but he could no longer say anything. Fresh blood flowed out of his palm. The archers around him also stopped shooting. The young archer furrowed his brows and coldly and emotionlessly said, "Continue." The power of the arrows rose again. In an instant, Sanshur's body was pierced by a dozen arrows. Fresh blood dyed his entire body red. Sanshur slowly closed his eyes and sighed again in his heart. He knew that showing weakness to lure the enemy was not feasible. When Yin Xiaoyi's disciple did things, he indeed had the cold and emotionless style of his teacher. He waved his hand, and his large sleeve brushed away a number of arrows. His eyes opened, and a bright light flashed. With an explosive roar, the wooden staff he had been holding in his hand split open from the outside by this Persian chi. Pieces of wood flew in all directions, revealing the knife inside. In Suzhou, Sanshur had once used one knife to cut through a long street. At this moment, his knife could only cut toward himself. Slashing down diagonally, the edge of the knife entered the flesh without a sound. He ruthlessly chopped off his right calf. He would no longer be trapped in the animal trap. Sanshur was like a large bird with broken wings. Once again, he ruthlessly flew into the air. Like a goshawk hunting a rabbit, he killed his way into the enemy ranks. The knife light splashed like snow, causing people to spray blood. In one exchange, he cut off 3 heads and broke open the chests of a number of people. The forest was a scene of bloody slaughter. What a tyrannical knife! When Sanshur struck, the cold young archer had already turned and left. Silently, he climbed up a tree and began to shoot arrow after arrow. He knew that the other party was already at the end of his strength. He had also cut off his own leg, and blood flowed freely. The other party wouldn't be able to hold out for much longer. As expected, after the knife light dazzled for a moment, it gradually dimmed. After killing a ground full of archers, the poison in Sanshur's body flared up. His injuries flared up, and he ran out of blood. Dropping the hilt of his long knife to the ground, he gave a muffled grunt and spat out his last breath. The second priest of the Qing temple was dead. After confirming Sanshur's death, the archers surrounded him. They were all elites of the military. They had come to surround and kill, and even shamelessly murder, the second priest of the Qing temple. Not everyone could maintain their calm on the surface, particularly after the other party had fallen into their trap and was still able to cut off his own leg and kill so many of their brothers. When these people thought back to it, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. "Clean it up. You all return to camp," the young archer said coldly. "Ding Han, you're in charge of cleaning up." A soldier bowed in a low voice in acknowledgement. The woods once again returned to peace. The soldiers who were good at shooting took off their disguises and found another secret place to change and return to camp. After exiting the woods, the young archer had already changed into a common commoner's clothing. He did not follow the group back to camp. Instead, he turned left and right out of the woods and found the official road back to the capital. On the way, he hitched a ride in a carriage. Along the way, he chatted and laughed with the merchant as he entered Jingdo. After entering Jingdo, the archer first ate 2 bowls of vegetable porridge and then bought a paper windmill on the side of the street. He passed through the main street in the south of the city and walked through a secluded alley. Stopping at the door of a storytelling hall, he seemed to not be able to resist the temptation of the storybooks. He entered the building and asked for a cup of tea and a plate of melon seeds. He then began to listen. After listening for a while, he seemed to have the urge to pee and went to the bathroom. Behind the bathroom, he exited the courtyard wall. After confirming that no one was following him, he entered a manor. He didn't know whose family this manor belonged to. He walked as easily and freely as if he were in his own home. Entering the study, he knelt in front of the desk and reported to the pair of small and delicate feet under the table. "Your Highness, it has been eliminated. You've worked hard." The eldest princess of Qing Kingdom, Li Yunrui, smiled slightly. When this woman, who was so beautiful that she did not seem mortal, smiled, it added a sense of charm. When a young archer killed great master Sanshur, he appeared cold and heartless. At this moment, he did not dare meet the eldest princess's eyes. After rising, he stood obediently to the side. "Sanshur, what a pity." The eldest princess sighed with great regret. "He didn't listen to my words and insisted on imitating the bravery of an ignorant man. At this time, how can we make the emperor suspicious of us? Everything is not ready. Now is not the time to act. For someone like him who doesn't listen, we can only let him go." The young archer remained silent and did not say a word. He knew that these major matters should be the concerns of the elders. He only needed to carry them out. The eldest princess glanced at him and said with a slight smile, "You can't follow Governor Yin into battle in the north. Do you have any complaints?" The young archer smiled and said, "Father only drinks all day in the north. How can it compare to the excitement of the capital?" After saying a few more words, the eldest princess allowed him to leave the study. This manor was nameless. No one knew that the eldest princess would occasionally come here. She liked to sit alone in this study and think about things. She would often think about herself until she was crazy. Junshan Conference? A self-mocking smile rose to the corners of her lips. When she was young, what was her goal in organizing the Junshan Conference? It was to do something for the Qing kingdom. It was to help her brother the emperor do things that he found inconvenient, such as killing an official or stealing someone's property. Although her brother the emperor had never known of the existence of the Junshan Conference, the Junshan Conference had helped him a great deal in secret, such as the battle with Northern Qi and the secret influence on Dongyi. But when did such a huge change happen? The purpose of the Junshan Conference had undergone such a great change in her hands. A glimmer of misery flashed across the eldest princess's face. She thought of Fan Xian far away in Jiangnan, the palace treasury, the Overwatch Council, and the suspicions and inclinations the emperor had shown these 2 years. "I gave the emperor a pearl. What did the emperor give me?" She closed her eyes and then opened them again. Her gaze had already recovered its calm. She smiled slightly and thought, "Since the emperor does not accept me, I should cherish myself." It was not impossible to pay a price for this. Sir Yuan's words did indeed have his reasons. It was still the same patch of forest. Other than the faint smell of blood, there was no trace of a previous attack. It looked like the military's handling of the scene was no worse than the Overwatch Council's. Everyone had already left. Ding Han, who had been left behind by Yin Xiaoyi's son to take care of the aftermath, was the last to leave the forest. Strangely, not long after he left, he silently returned to the forest. Under a pile of mud, he found a broken arrow that he had purposely hidden earlier and carefully tucked it into his clothes. Following this, he spat on his hands and began to dig with great difficulty. After digging for an indeterminable amount of time, he finally reached a very deep place and dug out the bodies that had already been burned beyond recognition. After confirming that it was Sansher's body, he pulled out a dagger from his boot and inserted it into the neck bone of the body. Very carefully, he chopped off Great Master Sansher's head. He refilled the soil, scattered leaves, and spread moss. After confirming that there were no problems, this person called Ding Han's side with satisfaction and turned to leave the forest. He didn't need to enter Jingdo, because the place he was going to was outside Jingdo. In the back mountain of Chun Garden, the back door, the wooden arch, and the old servant. The old servant accepted a box and a package from his hands. Ding Han silently bowed and began to return to the camp. In a dark and cold room, Chun Pingping sat in a wheelchair and looked with a slight smile at the charred head on the cloth. "Do you think it's already been burned to this extent? Will the emperor still be able to recognize that idiot Sansher?" The old servant chuckled and couldn't say anything. He only saw that the old master seemed to be happy, so he was also happy. Chun Pingping once again took out the broken arrow from the box and looked at it with narrowed eyes for a while. Suddenly, in a sharp voice, he said, "Sansher is an idiot. Do you think the eldest princess is also an idiot?" She could have used anyone, but she used Yin Xiaoyi's son. Admittedly, she can tie Yin Xiaoyi tighter, but it would also be easy for her to be exposed, no? It was clear that this director of the Overwatch Council did not think much of the scheming ability of the younger generation. He used his withered hands to gently stroke the wool blanket on his knees and shook his head. In this world, there are always some people who think that there are some things that no one will ever know, such as that bullshit Junshan Conference. The old servant quietly said, "Are we going to enter the palace?" "Yes." The commissioner's side seems to be a bit difficult to make a move. The old servant had been Chun Pingping's trusted aide and housekeeper for 20 years. He knew most of the director's thoughts and carefully reminded him. Chun Pingping sank into silence. A moment later, he said, "Fan Xian might still act too early, but let him do it. Let him do what he thinks is right. As for the things he might not want to do, I'll do it." There were many things that Qin Pingping would never tell Fan Xian because he knew that Fan Xian's heart was far from being as hard and strong as his. He pushed the wheelchair to the window. In the distance came the faint sounds of laughter from the beautiful women the old man had collected. He looked outside and thought of Yuan, who had always been by the eldest princess's side. He couldn't resist smiling innocently like a child. Often, the things that enemies don't want me to know, I actually know, but a glimmer of self-mockery flashed through the old man's eyes. He sighed and said, "Sometimes being a person who knows everything is not a happy thing." The old servant gently massaged his shoulders. He knew that tomorrow, the director would bring the head and the broken arrow into the palace. The Juanshan conference would appear in front of the emperor for the first time, and the emperor would finally make up his mind. What the director needed was for the emperor to make up his mind. Qin Pingping slowly lowered his head. If he didn't stir up some big trouble and kill a few nobles in the palace, how could he be willing to let go and die? Chapter 383. The emperor was not in a good mood. Everyone in the palace and court knew that the emperor had not been in a good mood these few days. The emperor had even stopped his regular program of watching plays with the Empress Dowager every 10 days. Other than the daily court conferences, not many people had the opportunity to see the emperor. Eunuch Yao, Eunuch Ho, and the now reinstated Eunuch Dai had been surrounded by officials outside the palace every day. Everyone wanted to know exactly what had happened. The emperor also did not summon his trusted officials into the palace. Looking at it, it did not seem that he was worried about something. Everyone knew that the emperor was not in a good mood. In the court conference, most of the memorials from various provinces had been rejected. The official of the Supreme Court had been harshly scolded. Old Qin of the Bureau of Military Affairs had also been scolded by the emperor. The Qin family was the emperor's most trusted aide and an important official in the military. Under normal circumstances, the emperor would always leave the Qin family some face in front of the civil and military officials. Now, he had treated them harshly. The expressions of the Jingdo garrison Qin Hung and General Qin did not change. When they entered and left the Hall of Governmental Affairs, they still maintained their bright smiles. It looked like they did not care much about the emperor's scolding of their family. Seeing this, the officials understood that the emperor was using the scolding of his trusted aide to remind some other people in the capital. This was a very chaotic method. No one could guess who the emperor wanted to remind, but they knew that the matter of reminding already existed. As expected, on the third day, Yizhong, Farway, and Dingzhou once again sent a pain memorial to the emperor saying that now that the world was at peace, there was no longer a need for Dingzhou to maintain too many military forces and that some people should be dismissed. Asking to be dismissed was the Yi family's fearful stance. The emperor lightly allowed it. He did not allow the court conference or the Bureau of Military Affairs to debate this matter. The officials, including the newly appointed Hu the Scholar and Shu the Scholar, all thought this was a follow-up to last year's Hanging Temple incident and did not think of anything else. After the Yi family asked to be dismissed, the emperor's mood seemed to improve slightly. He resumed his daily greetings to the Empress Dowager. At the same time, he allowed the eldest princess to once again live in the palace. Guangxin Palace once again truly opened its doors for the eldest princess. Distance made beauty, but also made danger. A family living together would certainly be much safer. This was probably what the emperor thought, the old man in the Chen garden thought. He sighed, knowing that things did not go according to his plan. He still needed to do something. However, since the seeds had begun to sprout under the cultivation of the black soil in people's hearts, there would be a day when poisonous vines would grow and break through the layer of hard rock that was pressing on it. Only the people who lived in the palace knew that the emperor's mood had not truly improved. His face still carried a trace of worry and slight sadness. The emperor was the master of the world and the master of the palace. He was the object that everyone needed to look at. He was the object that everyone entrusted their lives to. He was the hope of everyone's future and wealth. Thus, everyone in the palace was carefully and nervously guessing what other thoughts the emperor was hiding in his heart. The few old eunuchs who serve in Taiji Palace and the royal study had long become shrewd people. Of course, they refused to make a sound when the various palaces probed. Furthermore, under eunuch Hong's accumulated power, the nannies and eunuchs of the various palaces did not dare to ask too obviously. After the eldest princess moved gloomily into Guangxin Palace, she immediately recovered her usual beautiful appearance. Every day, she went to the Empress Dowager's side to chat with her. Occasionally, she would go to the Eastern Palace to see the Empress and Crown Prince. However, she herself was a bit confused. She didn't know what exactly the Emperor was thinking. At this time, a head eunuch in the Eastern Palace became a very important figure. He was called Hong Zhu and had always worked at the Emperor's side. He was deeply liked by the Emperor. Furthermore, it was rumored that he had some sort of relative relationship with eunuch Hong. He was also familiar with the people in Taiji Palace and the royal study. If such a person was sent to scout for information, he should be the most suitable candidate. Hong Zhu had already been the head of fourth-level eunuchs in the Eastern Palace for 3 months. Relying on the identity that the Emperor had sent and his own careful and appropriate service, he had already received the Emperor's approval. Of course, he could not immediately be accepted. However, the Empress had also given Hong Zhu enough benefits. She also wanted to see whether or not Hong Zhu could be used and to what extent he could be used. The Empress smiled slightly as she looked at Hong Zhu kneeling in front of her. She somewhat liked this little eunuch's knowledge and tactfulness. His features were delicate and pretty. In a quiet voice, she said, "The Emperor is worried about national affairs. Naturally, I also want to share the Emperor's burden. Although the back palace cannot recklessly interfere in national affairs, knowing the Emperor's mood can make some soup for him to make the Emperor more comfortable." Hong Zhu flatteringly said, "The Empress has thought of everything. Go ask the Empress side." The Empress sighed and said, "If His Majesty finds out, there is no need to hide it. It is not a shameful matter. Don't harm yourself." Hong Zhu's expression was moved. He accepted the order and left. Not long after, this newly popular person in the palace walked a few laps around the huge palace. After being flattered, he didn't dare to continue accepting compliments and quickly returned to the Empress' palace. He leaned close to the Empress's ear and quietly said something. The Empress furrowed her brows slightly. A hint of worry appeared on her noble face. She sighed and said, "So, it is because of the matter of the national treasury being empty. I also know about the repair work on the riverbanks. It has been delayed from the beginning of the year until now. It is all because of a lack of money. If I could make silver out of nothing, I could also resolve the Emperor's worries." "What a pity," Hong Zhu chuckled and said, "the Empress is the mother of the world. Why do you need to worry about these things? As for the national treasury, isn't their Minister Fan managing the Ministry of Revenue?" Hearing the words, Ministry of Revenue, the Empress's eyes lit up. She pretended to ask carelessly, "Minister Fan has managed the Ministry of Revenue for many years. It can be said that he has worked hard and performed a great service. The emptiness of the national treasury is a problem of income. What can he do?" Hong Zhu was slightly startled. He wanted to speak, but stopped. The Empress looked at his expression and smiled disdainfully. "You are just a child, yet you have so many things on your mind." Hong Zhu jumped in fright and quickly knelt down. With a pained expression, he said, "I wouldn't dare. It is just that in the royal study, I heard that the Emperor flew into a rage yesterday and said that the Ministry of Revenue is incompetent. Furthermore, he lowered his voice and said, I heard there are officials in the Ministry of Revenue who are in deficit and secretly diverting national funds. The amount is also very large, so the Emperor is furious." The Empress's heart jumped, but she immediately hid the expression on her face. Smiling slightly, she said, "Don't tell me about these court matters. How has the Emperor been feeling lately? What places do you often visit in the palace?" Hong Zhu glanced around and knew that this was a taboo in the palace. Gritting his teeth, he crawled to the Empress's side and lowered his voice to say something. The Empress's long, shapely eyebrows furrowed and immediately softened. Her lips trembled slightly. Her cheeks were pale. In a cold voice, she said, "Xiao Lu. It's Xiao Lu again." After Hong Zhu left the palace with a heart full of unease and fear, a young man flashed out from behind the screen. This young man was wearing a light yellow robe. The lines of his face were soft, and his eyes were clear and spirited. In the palace, other than the emperor, empress dowager, and empress, only the crown prince could wear this kind of clothing. Presently, the crown prince's body was much better than it had been 2 years ago. At least, much of the unhealthy whiteness on his face had faded. This was, of course, because of the emperor's strict discipline in not allowing him to waste too much energy on matters between men and women. It was also because he was gradually growing older and faced with complicated situations, as well as the pressure of his royal brothers step by step. This was a change he had no choice but to make. For the crown prince, in the past, his greatest enemy was the second prince. However, after the second prince was successfully beaten half of his body by Fan Xian, he suddenly discovered that Fan Xian, who he had thought was his greatest help, was actually also his father's son. Furthermore, he was the son of his father and that demoness. For the Eastern Palace, there had long been an unresolvable grudge with the Yi family. Thus, the crown prince was most wary of Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan. Everyone knew that after Fan Xian's past was revealed, if the crown prince took the throne, Fan Xian would certainly not have a good end. If Fan Xian held power alone, he would certainly not allow the crown prince to take the throne. "Mother, it seems that we can act on the matter of the Ministry of Revenue," the crown prince said as he listened to the empress and Hong Zhu's conversation from behind the screen. The empress closed her eyes and thought for a moment. She then said, "How trustworthy is this eunuch Hong Zhu?" 70%. The empress smiled slightly and said, "I also think so." Hong Zhu was originally an errand boy in the royal study at your father's side. His meteoric rise was just around the corner. Although he has been moved to the Eastern Palace and has risen 2 ranks to become the head eunuch, his power is far less than it was before. The crown prince said, if Fan Xian had not reported the matter of Hong Zhu asking for bribes to father would not have angrily chased Hong Zhu out. Everyone in the palace knew about this matter. They all knew the story of that day in the royal study. They all thought that the reason Hong Zhu left the royal study was because he had offended the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian. The empress sighed and said, "Let's see how the emperor deals with it. He truly likes Hong Zhu, that little eunuch. The problem is, I am not sure if this matter is true or false." The crown prince furrowed his brows in deep thought and said, "It should be true that Hong Zhu holds a grudge against Fan Xian. The eunuchs and serving girls in the palace have all heard him speak of this matter through gritted teeth. As for father, even if he uses Hong Zhu to monitor me, I have not made any mistakes in this half a year." The empress nodded. A murderous intent flashed through her phoenix eyes. She smiled coldly and said, "As long as the reason for the emperor's anger is true, the matter of the Ministry of Revenue can be investigated. Fan Jian cannot remain in the Ministry of Revenue. Otherwise, with Fan Xian in charge of the palace treasury in Jiangnan and Fan Jian in charge of the national treasury in Jingdou, your future days will be difficult." The crown prince nodded and replied, "I will always remember father's teachings and only do what father wishes to do." The empress furrowed her brows and said, "In a moment, I will go to Guangxin Palace and ask for your aunt's opinion." Suddenly hearing the eldest princess name, a strange light flashed through the crown prince's eyes. He immediately hid it well and said hesitantly, "Should we ask my aunt's side to step in?" The empress shook her head and smiled coldly. She's also not easy to get along with. Besides, now that the emperor has her live in the palace, isn't it also with the intention of monitoring her closely? If she is deep in the palace, it will not be easy for her to communicate with the officials in court. Although the way your father does things often looks simple, he is actually very clever. You have to learn more in this area. It has been very difficult for your aunt to move around recently. The nominal mother of the country sighed, but there was a sense of schadenfreude that could not be hidden between her brows. The eldest princess was too dazzling among the women of the Qing kingdom and had always faintly overshadowed the empress' elegance. How could she be happy now that her husband was becoming more and more displeased with her sister-in-law? Although logically, the empress knew it was not a good thing, emotionally, she still couldn't help but feel a glimmer of joy. That shameless little vixen. I'm just going to let her know. The empress sighed and patted the crown prince's shoulder. For now, you have to endure the relationship between your aunt and the second prince. Don't remember what happened in the past. As for the matter of investigating the deficit in the Ministry of Revenue this time, I will find someone to do it, don't worry. A faint coldness surged between her brows. Although Mother's paternal family has been completely wiped out by those wretched people, there's still some people hidden in court. As for Fan Jian, did he think he could hide it from the people of the world by moving so much silver from the national treasury to Jiangnan? Did he think he could hide it from the emperor? No matter how much the emperor likes Fan Xian, he would not allow this kind of thing to happen under his eyes. The crown prince was slightly shocked. No wonder the deficit in the Ministry of Revenue was so great. Fan Jian was so daring. Only now did he know that his mother and aunt had long grasped the root of the Ministry of Revenue's problem. No wonder they were so confident. The empress smiled slightly and said, after the Ministry of Revenue, the world will be peaceful for a few more days. Fan Xian will not be able to be as lively as he is now. Think about it carefully. In the emperor's heart, as long as you don't do anything out of line, even if you fight with those people, he will just pretend he didn't see it. In the end, you are still the crown prince. This is something everyone knows. The crown prince sighed. Throughout the history of dynasties, perhaps only I, the crown prince, have been the most useless. The empress smiled coldly and said, who knows how many crown princes in history lived worse than you before they took the throne? What are you afraid of? As long as you endure until the day you take the throne, there will be times when you can hold your head high. She continued coldly. Mother has concluded that the emperor still wholeheartedly wants you to succeed the throne. Naturally, I have my reasons. The crown prince anxiously said, but although the second prince has fallen, the third prince has gone down to Jiangnan and has always been taken by Fan Xian. This was the matter that had been discussed the most in the palace recently. The third prince was young, yet he had followed the imperial envoy down to Jiangnan to oversee affairs. It was called learning, but was it to learn how to rule a country? Thus, the third prince's birth mother, Yi Pin, became the center of the discussion. However, this woman of the Liu family remained silent and reserved. The empress glared at the crown prince and gritted her teeth. You're even so afraid of an ignorant child. What kind of future do you have? The crown prince gloomily said, I really can't see. Father has the intentions you speak of. If he didn't have those intentions, wouldn't he have destroyed you a long time ago? The empress had a tone of exasperation. The crown prince forced a smile and said, perhaps father is just looking for an opportunity. The empress shook her head and calmly said, you're wrong. Compared to the other brothers, you have one great advantage, but you yourself still can't see it. The crown prince asked in surprise, what advantage? There was a chill in the empress's calm expression. She slowly said, the great prince has Dongi background. The second prince's birth mother, Lady Shu, also has some power in the capital. The third prince's birth mother, Yi Pin, comes from the Liu family, which is a large family in the capital. She also has Fan Xian to rely on. Of all the princes, only we, mother and son, are alone without any family power to use. After all, the emperor and I have lived together for so many years. The empress smiled disdainfully. The empress smiled disdainfully and said, everything about your father is good, but he is too suspicious. If the throne of the Qing kingdom is to be passed down, of course, he is afraid that the Li family's royal power will fall to an outsider. Thus, when choosing a successor, he cannot accept the successor standing behind an overly large family power. Thus, the second prince can't, and the third prince even more so. The empress's cold gaze was like two knives digging into the crown prince's heart. Only you, The emperor had that old cripple kill your mother's family. One, it was for that evil demoness. Another, wasn't it to clear away obstacles for you in the future? Don't be afraid, my child. She gently stroked the crown prince's cold cheek and sighed. If there are no major problems, no matter how many tricks the emperor uses, it is all to urge you to grow and become strong. Many years ago, he had already chosen you, and he has never doubted his own choice. The empress smiled nervously and said, even if his choice was wrong to begin with. Her expression suddenly became severe. She gritted her teeth and said, so, do you understand? The reason you can have the position of crown prince and be able to ensure your future position is all because your mother's family paid with 3,000 lives. Those were your elders, your family. They are all dead. Their blood and corpses were used to pave this path to the imperial chariot for you. So, you must endure it until the day you succeed. A spring breeze floated through the royal palace, but this spring breeze was very cold and made one shiver in fear. The crown prince couldn't help but shiver because the Empress Dowager's great-grandmother was strict in managing the back palace. In reality, he had only recently learned the truth of the night Jingdo bled with blood from his mother's mouth. He knew that his grandfather and uncle had all died in that political turmoil. So, his father wanted to get rid of the relatives by his side. His heart began to tighten, and he didn't know how to react. If his mother's analysis was correct, then as long as he behaved calmly enough, and as long as there were no major problems in the world in the future, that dragon throne would ultimately be his. The crown prince's gaze gradually hardened. He looked at his mother and nodded his head heavily. Mother and son seemed to have forgotten what they had once said in their conversation. The prerequisite for the crown prince to succeed to the throne was that no major problems occurred. Everyone in the world knew, regardless of whether it was Chen Pingping or Sir Fan Jr. They were both sinister and ruthless people who were best at finding major problems for no problems. The palace and the court were actually two existences of one. Through the emperor, who could not be ignored, the two fields of power were perfectly and harmoniously united together. If the officials wanted to curry favor with the emperor, they had to curry favor with the nobles in the palace. If the nobles in the palace wanted to extend their hands outside the palace, they had to borrow the officials outside to do things for them. The so-called interest groups all came about this way. Thus, when the matter of the emperor losing his temper in the royal study regarding the Ministry of Revenue's deficit spread outside the palace through countless channels, the entire officialdom began to stir. The highest principle of being an official was that if the emperor did not like something, the officials had to quickly follow. Even if the person standing opposite the emperor was a legendary figure like the Grand Preceptor, the officials still had to bravely take the lead and not be willing to fall behind. With the emperor's mood as an indicator, this kind of thing would never go wrong. However, there was a clear time difference between the news from the palace and the reaction from the court conference. The officials were more steady and cautious than usual. One reason was because investigating the deficit of the Ministry of Revenue would inevitably involve the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian. Everyone knew that not only was Fan Jian extremely shrewd and ruthless, but he also had a close relationship with Imperial Prince Jing and a brotherly relationship with the Emperor. The officials didn't know what kind of affection the Emperor still had for Fan Jian. The second reason the officials were careful was very simple. It was because Fan Jian's son was named Fan Xian, and his courtesy name was Nji. He was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council and the imperial envoy with full power in Jiangnan Road. Although everyone knew that Fan Xian was the emperor's illegitimate child, everyone also knew that Fan Xian's loyalty and filial piety were famous throughout the Qin kingdom. There were countless stories circulating among the people, such as refusing to recognize his father even when he died in the palace and risking his life to enter the Fan Ancestral Hall at the annual meeting. If the investigation reached Minister Fan, no one knew what kind of reaction Fan Xian would have. The officials only knew that the second prince had once wanted to use the second young master of the Fan Manor. In the end, he had angered Fan Xian. Fan Xian had used countless vicious and sinister moves to arrogantly beat the second prince, who had already become a powerful force, into two ends. He had been utterly defeated and cut a sorry figure. In the end, Fan Xian had successfully beaten the second prince in a house arrest. This glorious battle result was enough to intimidate most of the officials who wanted to take advantage of politics. Sir Fan Jr. didn't even care about the second prince, much less these officials. However, the pressure from the palace was growing stronger and stronger. Furthermore, news from various sources had confirmed that the emperor indeed had the intention of taking action against the Ministry of Revenue. The true source of the emperor's unhappiness these days was the Ministry of Revenue. Thus, the restless officials finally suppressed their impulses and began to go home to write memorials. Among these officials, there were upright officials who sincerely served the country and hoped the court would stop investigating the Ministry of Revenue's deficit. There were also officials who had received the orders of nobles in the palace and wanted to use this matter to bring down the Fan family. They wanted to play a game of hitting a bull across the mountain and make Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, lose his reputation. Most of them were political opportunists who spent many years in the court trying to figure out the emperor's will in order to climb up. In short, for many different reasons, the Jingdo court officials had a rare unified opinion. They asked the court to thoroughly investigate the rumored deficit of the Ministry of Revenue. They had to give the people of the world and the emperor an explanation. It is difficult to guarantee that it will be within an hour, such as 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. I hope everyone can understand. Thank you. Chapter 384. In my free time, I suddenly wanted to reread the earlier parts of the Qingyu year and start from the 5th volume. I didn't think I would be so engrossed in it. Some of the chapters were really written with talent, I thought narcissistically. The Qing court conference began as scheduled. The sky was still brightening, and the royal palace was still cold. The emperor still sat high on the throne, and the officials still humbly and straightforwardly discussed the government affairs of each province. After all the urgent matters had ended, the emperor, with a faint tiredness on his face, opened his mouth and said, "Is there anything else?" An official from the Supreme Court stepped out and carefully reported, "Your Majesty, about the matter of Sir Fan Jr. of the Palace Treasury Transport Company. How should we deal with it?" What many officials in Jingdo did not expect was that the investigation into the Ministry of Revenue's deficit, which had been accumulating power for many days, had not yet begun. The criticism of Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, had already arrived fiercely. Within 3 days, memorials from the Jiangnan imperial censors and other officials flew into the royal palace in Jingdo like snowflakes. Each word and sentence pointed directly at the head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company, Fan Xian, for being arrogant and overbearing. Using his identity as an imperial envoy, he suppressed his colleagues, disregarded the laws of the country and court, and recklessly killed 4 Palace Treasury treasurers. He aroused the anger of the people and caused the workers of the 3 workshops to go on strike. The 3 workshops of the Palace Treasury were important pillars of the Qing kingdom's finances. It had been many years since something as major as a strike had happened, so when the news reached Jingdo, it shocked many people. Jingdo and Jiangnan were very far apart, so people did not know the true situation at the North Min Transport Company Yamen. They also did not know that it was Imperial Censor Guizheng and the officials of the eldest princess faction who were inverting black and white. It was clear that the strike had started and Fan Xian had suppressed and killed people. However, with these officials' impassioned criticism, it became that Fan Xian had killed people without reason first and aroused the anger of the people. In the hearts of the officials, Sir Fan Jr. was indeed someone who could do such an outrageous thing. Thus, before Lao Fan was investigated, the officials began to have deep opinions about Fan Jr. They discussed this matter in court for a few days in a row. However, they never came up with a plan. The emperor also did not relent. Among the civil officials, there were always a few who were not scum. They were not wary of the fact that Fan Xian was the emperor's illegitimate child. On the contrary, because of this matter, they cast even more distrustful gazes toward Fan Xian. They were worried that such a powerful official would harm the foundations of the Qing court and the interests of the people. For example, Hu the scholar, who had already entered the Hall of Governmental Affairs and was beginning to move about in the cabinet, had no contact with Fan Xian. His understanding of Fan Xian was limited to rumors in officialdom and among the people. Although he greatly admired Fan Xian's talent and knowledge through Shu the scholar's introduction, he still somewhat believed what was written in the memorials. Hu the scholar had been a local official for many years and knew how difficult it was to deal with the officials in the capital. He was afraid that Fan Xian would use his family power and background to run amok in the Jiangnan area once he left the capital without anyone to keep him in check. He decided to speak up for the Jiangnan officials. For one, it was to prevent them from being harmed too deeply locally. For another, he was afraid that Sir Fan Jr., whom he somewhat admired, would slip down the wrong path. Grand Secretary who stepped forward and said calmly, "Your Majesty, this matter should be thoroughly investigated." The Emperor rubbed his temples and asked, "Thoroughly investigated? I know that Fan Xian has long written a detailed report on this matter. The Overwatch Council also has a council report. The Hall of Governmental Affairs should have a copy on file. Grand Secretary, you should know that the palace treasury trouble this time was caused by Fan Xian investigating old abuses and seeking justice for the workers." Grand Secretary who said in a clear voice, "Your Majesty, this is only Sir Fan Jr.'s one-sided statement. Since there are so many officials who have sent memorials against him, we have to send someone to Jiangnan to ask. If what the memorials say is true, then we have to strictly investigate and properly make up for it. Only then can we not hurt the hearts of the tens of thousands of workers in the palace treasury. If what the memorials say is not true, then we should severely reprimand the Jiangnan road officials and properly comfort Sir Fan Jr. and give him justice." The Emperor glanced at him with a not-quite-there smile. He thought that after all this Grand Secretary insisted on sending someone to Jiangnan. However, Jingdo and Jiangnan were so far apart. Even if he sent someone from the capital, would Fan Xian be afraid of him? However, the Qing Emperor wanted to use the long-exiled Hu the scholar to return to the capital because he wanted Hu the scholar's stubbornness and uprightness. Just like how he had used Lin Ruofu and Chen Pingping to fight in the arena many years ago, the Qing Emperor planned to have Hu the scholar and Fan Xian fight in the arena in the future. Since it was so, he would not speak up at this time and reject the Grand Secretary's face. He smiled slightly and said, "The Grand Secretary's words are reasonable. Choose a person to go to Jiangnan to have a look. No matter what happens, you have to see it with your own eyes to know." What Hu the scholar wanted was this seemingly fair suggestion to handle the matter. Since his goal had been achieved, he retreated. At this time, Shu Wushu the scholar couldn't help but say worriedly, "Who is right and who is wrong will eventually be found out. I am only worried that after the palace treasury has experienced this storm, there will be problems with this year's revenue. After all, this is Sir Fan Jr.'s first year in charge of the palace treasury. Please give him some pointers, Your Majesty." This was a very gentle suggestion, but it also represented the worries of many officials. They were all worried that Fan Xian would be too ruthless and cause a major problem with the production of the entire palace treasury. However, Shu Wushu's gentleness did not mean that others were gentleness. On the contrary, a few officials used Shu the scholar's words as an opening and began to step forward to express their deep worry and loyalty to the court. They said that Sir Fan Jr. was, after all, young and the palace treasury matters were important. If this year the palace treasury declined too much compared to previous years, shouldn't the court consider choosing someone else? This was a brazen lack of trust in Fan Xian. The meaning was also clear. If Fan Xian could not raise the palace treasury's profit level, or even lower than in previous years, then what right did he have to control the palace treasury? It was because they were brazen and each word seemed to be thinking for the court. Although the officials knew that these officials wanted to move that deity out of the palace treasury, it was not convenient for them to refute. The emperor smiled slightly and said, "We won't know what the quality of the palace treasury is like this year until next year. You are all a bit too impatient. Whether or not Fan Xian will disappoint my expectations will have to wait for some time before we know." The emperor seemed to suddenly think of something and said, "However, the palace treasury bidding ended a few days ago. The bidding documents should have already been escorted back to Jingdo. You all want to see Fan Xian's ability. You should be able to know a thing or two by looking at the results of this bidding." The Qing kingdom's borders were wide, and Jiangnan and Jingdo were far apart. The news of the bidding in Suzhou on March 22nd would soon travel back to Jingdo. Originally, if Fan Xian had taken the secret mail route and the council newspaper, it would have been a few days faster. Perhaps Fan Xian had forgotten, or perhaps it was because of the problem of the bidding documents being kept secret. He had not revealed any information to the emperor or the court beforehand. Furthermore, after dealing with the strike in the 3 workshops in North Min, the Overwatch Council had begun to consciously block the information between the 2 places. Although Jingdo vaguely knew of the bidding incident that had caused a ruckus in Suzhou, they did not know the specifics. The news that should have traveled the fastest, under Fan Xian suppression, traveled even slower than Great Master Sanshur. The emperor gazed calmly at a person in the line below and said, "Has Taichung Temple received the document?" All of the income of the 3 workshops in the palace treasury was examined and managed by Taichung Temple and the internal court, so the person the emperor was asking about was the official of Taichung Temple. "Morning has just arrived." The official of Taichung Temple coughed and said with a frown, "I was in a hurry to enter the palace, so I haven't seen it yet." The emperor huffed coldly. "Then hurry and bring it." The official of Taichung Temple bowed and quickly jogged out of the palace. "Everyone, wait a bit." The emperor announced the postponement of the court conference with a not-quite-there smile. He took a bowl of tea from Eunuch Yao's hands beside him and slowly sipped it. Time passed by minute. The officials in the palace waited anxiously, but they didn't show any expression. Furthermore, they were indeed curious. How was Fan Xian's trip to Jiangnan going? Every year, the palace treasury received 40% of the deposit for the spring opening of bids. It was the first large sum of income the Qing court received each year. It was impossible for these officials not to look forward to it with excitement and nervousness as they waited. The emperor looked at these officials with cold eyes and felt slightly unhappy in his heart. He understood why all of the civil officials had to stand out and express their opinions toward Fan Xian. Even Xu Wu, who had a good relationship with Fan Xian, could not stand out. It was because Fan Xian was his illegitimate son. The officials had long had a stomach full of complaints about the court placing Fan Xian in such an important position. They always felt that this matter was not proper. It was all because the emperor cared for his own flesh and blood, so he used public tools and official positions to comfort him. "But this palace treasury is mine. This world is mine. This son is also mine." The emperor thought coldly. When was it your turn to talk so much? However, the emperor also knew that if Fan Xian truly failed to live up to expectations and turned Jiangnan into a mess, the palace treasury would also become decadent and harm an important part of the country, answering the worries of the officials. No matter how protective he would have no choice but to move him back. However, the emperor had confidence in Fan Xian. This confidence had been gradually cultivated. Ever since Fan Xian had entered the capital from Danzhou, this emperor had carefully and meticulously watched Fan Xian's every move. He wanted to see just what kind of ability the child he had with her would display. In all of these things, Fan Xian's performance had not disappointed him. His literary ability was 300 poems in front of the palace hall. His martial ability was a 9th-level martial artist, and his fame was a gift from Zhuang Moan. His ability to seize money was extraordinary, but he was not greedy or despicable. Even his romantic spirit was not something a normal young talent could achieve. As for his grasp of the state of the court, it was not like that of an 18-year-old young man. His loyalty to his ruler and filial piety to his father were truly something to brag about. When all was said and done, the emperor was still a normal middle-aged man. He couldn't help but feel a bit of pride toward Fan Xian's illegitimate child. After all, this was his seed. Thus, when the officials began to express doubt toward Fan Xian, he had Taichung Temple immediately report the details of the palace treasury bidding. Although he didn't know the exact number, the emperor had never doubted Fan Xian's ability to scrape the land. Scrape the land was the simplest skill for an official. A wave of hurried footsteps came from outside the hall. The official of Taichung Temple ran in with a red face and incessantly wiping the sweat from his forehead. Following behind him was the vice official of Taichung Temple, Ren Xiao, who was panting tiredly. Running all the way from Taichung Temple to Taiji Palace had indeed used up a lot of energy. After a simple bow, the emperor had the two of them rise. His body leaned forward, and with a glimmer of interest on his face, he asked, "How is it?" The various elders of the court in the hall also looked nervously at the two officials of Taichung Temple. The official of Taichung Temple gulped and didn't have time to say anything. With a happy expression, he reported in a loud voice, "Congratulations, Your Majesty." With these words, everyone knew that the palace treasury bidding in the 6th year of the Qin calendar was looking good. Furthermore, it was good, not just good. The officials who had the faint intention of protecting Fan Xian all let out a breath and revealed smiles on their faces. Shu the scholar also nodded his head in relief. Most of the other officials were slightly startled. It seemed that no one had thought that after the eldest princess's power had secretly hindered them in the palace treasury strike, Fan Xian, who had just taken control of the palace treasury, would be able to obtain such a good result. Only Who the scholar's expression was calm, and there was nothing strange. After the Qing emperor heard these words, his heart also relaxed. Although his expression remained calm, he sat his entire but back into the chair. Although he had confidence in Fan Xian, before he received a definite return, he was still a bit nervous. The emperor smiled slightly and said, "What is the exact number?" Everyone needed money, and the emperor was no exception. He had all the money in the world and hoped that the total amount of money in the world was as large as possible. He was the biggest landowner in the world. At this time, like all landowners, a faint joy flashed through his eyes. Official Ren Xiao coughed and took out a file. In a clear voice, he read, "On the 22nd of March in the 6th year of the Qin calendar, the Palace Treasury Transport Company has opened the bidding. North, South, and East roads have the right to purchase 16 lots. The total is..." At this point, he seemed to be shocked by the huge number again. He calmed himself down a little and said, "Yes." He calmed his mind and said, 24,220,000. Exactly. Once these swaying words left his mouth, the entire Taiji Palace became absolutely silent. For a long time, no one was able to speak. 24,220,000 taels? So much. This was a full 80% more than last year. Fan Xian, how'd he do it? Did he know a sorcery that bewitched people's hearts and turned the Jiangnan royal merchants into fools? The officials were all dumbfounded and looked at each other. They were pressed down by this enormous number until they could not breathe. Everyone's spirits sank into a kind of confusion. There was a crash. Shu the scholar's face was bright red as he fell to the ground, causing a commotion among the officials. It took a long time before they managed to help him up. The scholar's expression was incomparably excited as he said to the emperor on the dragon chair, "Congratulations, Your Majesty. Congratulations, Your Majesty." Only now did the officials react. After a roar of surprise, they turned and bowed to the emperor and sang praises. The flattery was like a tide. The flattery was like the sea. The emperor's grace was like a mountain. The heavens blessed the Qing kingdom. The emperor was wise, and so on and so forth. 24 million liang of silver. Even if only 40% of it could be earned, it was still nearly 10 million liang of silver. Such a large sum of money could be used to do many things, such as repairing the river, strengthening the military, helping the people, or increasing salaries. Regardless of what faction these officials belonged to, they were, after all, the officials of the most powerful Qing kingdom in the world. Thinking of the fact that the court had such a large sum of silver and could solve the urgent problem of the empty national treasury, they all began to cheer. This kind of cheer was not fake. It was true happiness. The officials, regardless of whether they were greedy or not, virtuous or foolish, always hoped for the court to be better. While these people were furiously flattering the emperor, they couldn't help but think of the person they had suspected and opposed earlier. Sir Fan Jr. The palace treasury bidding had gone so smoothly and brought such great benefits to the court. Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, had to take the most credit. However, how were they going to turn this corner? Thus, some of the officials rolled their eyes and refused to mention the Jiangnan matter no matter what. At this time, it was Hu the scholar who was the first to stand out. Once he stood out, the lively and happy court immediately quieted down. Everyone wanted to know what Hu the scholar wanted to say. Hu the scholar calmly reported, "This amount is truly hard to believe. I don't hope that Sir Fan has used some other method, like draining the pond to catch the fish. This year, the Jiangnan royal merchants have been squeezed dry. If the palace treasury's production can't keep up, what will happen next year?" In the midst of the peace, there was suddenly an additional discordant note. It truly made people uncomfortable. The crowd of officials clamored. Even those who didn't like Fan Xian couldn't stand it any longer. They all spoke up for the Palace Treasury Transport Company, thinking that Hu the scholar's words were inappropriate. The emperor also broke away from his earlier excitement. He gazed coldly at Hu the scholar and said, "In your opinion, Fan Xian has obtained so much silver for the court. Instead of being rewarded, he should be punished?" Hu the scholar shook his head and said resolutely and decisively, "My words are only a glimmer of misgivings. After all, I'm not in Jiangnan and do not know the specifics. I'm only doing my duty to remind the emperor. As for Sir Fan Jr., as long as there are no problems with the bidding this time, he should not be punished at all. Instead, he should be greatly rewarded." The emperor calmed his state of mind and quietly asked, "In whose opinion, how should he be rewarded? Although it is a matter of silver, it is the foundation of the country," Hu the scholar calmly said. "Sir Fan Jr. has performed such a great service, so he should receive an extraordinary reward." The emperor narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "What is an extraordinary reward?" After completely investigating the matter of the bids in Northmin and Suzhou, Hu the scholar raised his head and warmly said, "I am willing to recommend Sir Fan Jr. to join the Hall of Governmental Affairs and discuss matters in the cabinet." After these words were said, the court was shaken. The officials were shocked. What kind of role was the Hall of Governmental Affairs? It was the center of the court. After Prime Minister Lin left, the Qin Kingdom no longer had the position of Prime Minister. The scholars of the Hall of Governmental Affairs were responsible for the functions of the Prime Minister, particularly after Qin Hung took the position of commander of the Jingdou garrison. After the Minister of Justice, Yan Hangshu, left, and Hu the scholar returned to the capital, the position of the Hall of Governmental Affairs in the cabinet was already set. If one could enter the Hall of Governmental Affairs, it was equivalent to entering the highest decision-making authority of the court. Did Hu the scholar want to recommend Fan Xian into the cabinet? The officials wondered which side Hu the scholar was on. Why did he say such bad things one moment and then give Fan Xian such power and such a high position the next? The Minister of Justice, Yan Hangshu, stared at Hu the scholar with a glimmer of jealousy and confusion. Unexpectedly, the emperor heard this suggestion and didn't even think. He straightforwardly said, "No, Fan Xian is too young." The officials were slightly at ease. They thought that the emperor's suggestion was acceptable. Otherwise, it would be too absurd to have a young man, not yet 20, enter the Hall of Governmental Affairs to discuss matters. Hu the scholar calmly said, "In ancient times, there were 16 sages who were prime ministers. Furthermore, the Hall of Governmental Affairs is the emperor's writing organization. It is not a true prime minister. Furthermore, Sir Fan Jr. is talented and brimming with talent. He holds many positions and has many abilities. Such a talent should help the emperor share his worries and solve his difficulties in court." The emperor glanced at him with a not-quite-there smile and still simply shook his head. He is the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. According to the Qing law, Overwatch Council officials cannot be a court official. Even after he retires, he can only take up a position in the three temples. Who the scholar followed up quickly. In the end, the Qing law is not as good as the emperor's edict. His youth is not a problem, and his position in the Overwatch Council is not a problem. If it were not so, how could I say it is an exceptional reward? The emperor smiled and waved his hand. There is no need to discuss this matter further. I will not allow it. The emperor's words could not be taken back. Who the scholar could only retreat. However, there was no other expression on his face. The emperor narrowed his eyes and looked down. He saw the scholar and Shu Wu exchange glances. He knew that Shu Wu, this old man, had received the news beforehand and immediately guessed why Who the scholar would take the opportunity to make such an absurd suggestion. A talent. And Ji is indeed a talent. It was precisely because the abilities Fan Xian had displayed were too shocking that the civil official system would always be wary of Fan Xian in the Overwatch Council. They were more than willing to let Fan Xian leave the Overwatch Council and throw him back into the warm embrace of the civil officials. After all, Fan Xian wore the hat of an immortal poet and was faintly the leader in the hearts of the young scholars. For Hu and Shu the scholar, the two heads of the civil officials, accepting Fan Xian was not a difficult matter. Hu the scholar and Shu the scholar were people who cherished talent and understood the situation. They could see the emperor's plans for the future, but they were not willing to let Fan Xian, a bright pearl, be thrown into the darkness of the Overwatch Council. Regardless of whether it was for the safety of the civil official system or for Fan Xian, they both wanted to poach Fan Xian over. Although it was a bit early to bring this up, Who the scholar had already seized this rare opportunity to demonstrate the sincerity of the civil official system. Many years in advance, he had begun to lay the groundwork for his speech. The Qing emperor had always been tolerant of the officials' little thoughts and didn't care much about them. On the contrary, from this matter, he felt more and more how much glory his illegitimate child had brought to the royal family. The emperor's heart was proud. His expression was calm, but his gaze was complicated. He glanced at the Minister of Revenue, who had been silent in the line the entire time, his son's father in name, Fan Jian. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www. CMFU. Com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 385. Although the emperor's gaze only lightly brushed past, it landed in the eyes of many observant people in the court. However, at this time, the palace treasury bidding documents had arrived. Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, had raised his official reputation to a terrifying level because of the 20 million liang of silver. Presumably, the emperor would be happy. Were they going to investigate the Ministry of Revenue's debts at this time? The silver that the Jiangnan Palace Treasury had sent was enough to smooth everything out. Furthermore, if they investigated the Ministry of Revenue at this time, would it appear that they were not giving Fan Xian face? In reality, the officials all knew that the Ministry of Revenue had to be investigated in the end because rumors of the Ministry of Revenue's deficit had spread for a long time. The so-called wind from an empty cave might not be without reason. Furthermore, the emptiness of the national treasury before and after the year seemed to faintly confirm this point. If this matter was not cleared up, the Qing Kingdom's court would not have a stable footing. However, investigating was investigating. As for when to investigate, that would require great wisdom to decide. Fan Xian had just performed a great service. Immediately, these officials jumped out to accuse Fan Jian. It seemed a bit unreasonable. They didn't know what the emperor meant. No matter what, there needed to be someone taking the lead. Thus, after the court had calmed down slightly, an official rose and knelt on the ground to report to the emperor about the Ministry of Revenue's deficit. He spoke with certainty as if how much money was missing from the national treasury had all fallen into his eyes. No one knew where this official got his confidence from. The emperor's meaning was very unclear. Listening to the official's words, he furrowed his brows and nodded. For a moment, the officials didn't know whether the emperor wanted to investigate or not. The officials didn't dare stare at the emperor's expression, so they all secretly glanced at the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian, in the ranks. They saw that Fan Jian still had a serious expression. Amidst the solemnity, there was a hint of contentment. They couldn't help but cooperate with this official's composure. The matter of the Ministry of Revenue. After the discussion in the royal study, an edict will come down. The emperor coldly finished these words and announced the end of the court meeting. With a wave of his dragon robe, he moved behind the screen. The officials walked out of the palace. Along the way, they couldn't resist whispering and guessing what the emperor was thinking. That afternoon, in a not very spacious royal study, under the dragon couch, there were a few embroidered stools. The scholars of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, the Minister of Appointments Yan Hangshu, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Works were all seated. Next to the dragon couch, the crown prince, the first prince, and the second prince stood respectfully on the ground with their hands hanging by their sides. The emperor sat on the flat couch. With a calm expression, he flipped through the memorials the court officials had presented. Actually, since last night, there had been an endless stream of officials who had begun to send in memorials to accuse the Ministry of Revenue of running a deficit and officials misappropriating national funds. However, after the banknotes Fan Xian had sent, this powerful wave of attention was immediately stopped. The emperor also did not allow the officials to debate this matter in the court conference. Sitting on the embroidered stools, Shu the scholar and Hu the scholar quietly met each other's eyes. They knew that the emperor had placed the matter of investigating the Ministry of Revenue in the royal study to discuss, because he wanted to give Minister of Revenue Fan Jian some face. However, why was Minister Fan not in the royal study today? If the emperor truly had the intention of returning to the Fan Manor, he should have allowed him to defend himself here. The two scholars' hearts were slightly nervous. Looking at the emperor's arrangements, it seemed to be different from what they had guessed. The deficit of the Ministry of Revenue looked like it was real and not another of the emperor's little tricks. It looked like Minister Fan was truly going to be pushed to the heart of the struggle. Fan Jian is sick. Seeming to guess what the officials were guessing, the emperor didn't even raise his head as he spoke in a quiet voice. However, it was difficult to suppress a faint anger in his lightly raised voice. The officials smiled bitterly and thought to themselves that this chief steward of the Qin court was truly a wonderful person. Every time someone in court accused him, he never did anything. He was too lazy to care about any alliances. He even seemed disdainful of entering the palace to defend himself. It was just such a simple move to escape from illness. Minister Fan's courage. It looked like it was not as small as people had previously thought. Everyone speak. The emperor threw the memorial in his hand to one side and said, "Regarding the matter of the Ministry of Revenue, what do you all think?" The faces of these elders in the center of the Qin court were calm. Their eyes were on their noses, and their noses were on their hearts. Even if they were beaten to death, they would not be the first to jump out and offend the Fan family. Although they all thought that the Ministry of Revenue needed to be investigated for the sake of the court, these people all had good relationships with Fan Jian. In addition, since the entire court suspected the Ministry of Revenue, there would always be someone who couldn't hold back their anger before them. Unexpectedly, the elders all had good self-control skills. After a moment, no one spoke. The royal study sank into an incomparably awkward silence. The crown prince looked at this strange scene and couldn't help but laugh in his heart. He thought to himself that the officials only wanted stability, but they had not expected that this kind of behavior would probably make his father more and more unhappy in his heart. At this moment, it was time for him to show off. He quickly coughed and glanced at Shu the scholar. Shu the scholar paused and also felt that the situation was a bit delicate. The emperor had asked a question, yet none of the officials dared to reply. Where would the emperor put his face? He quickly opened his mouth and said, "Your Majesty." He only had time to say 2 words before the emperor's suppressed anger exploded out. He scolded, The memorials to investigate the Ministry of Revenue were submitted by you. He picked up the memorials beside him and waved them around, angrily scolding. At this time, the ones who are acting like dead birds in front of me are also you. What use does the court have for you, silent gourds? The officials in the royal study were afraid. They quickly left their seats and bowed to admit their guilt with bitter smiles. The emperor drank a bowl of white fungus soup and slightly calmed the anger in his stomach. He huffed coldly and waved his hand to indicate for them to sit. Since the emperor had become angry, the limelight was clear. Shu the scholar had a good relationship with the fan manor. He felt that he was wholeheartedly working for the public and did not have a personal grudge against Minister Fan. Additionally, he did not want anyone to use the matter of investigating the Ministry of Revenue to attack the fan manor. He took the lead and said, "The matter of the Ministry of Revenue is very important. This is where the court's finances are located. Although I don't know where the recent rumors came from or where the Imperial Censorate learned that the Ministry of Revenue owed so much, since there is such a reason, it must be investigated. Let's see how your Majesty intends to investigate." Shu the scholar considered his words and smiled slightly. These years, Minister Fan has always been in charge of the Ministry of Revenue. Although he was an assistant minister a few years ago, because the old minister was always sick in bed, the affairs of the Ministry of Revenue were all handled by him. You must know that the matter of the Ministry of Revenue is the most trivial, so the court officials often overlook its importance. Managing the Ministry of Revenue is difficult to achieve merit, but if something happens, it is too easy. In the end, it is nothing more than a hard job. Sir Fan has managed the Ministry of Revenue for many years. Although he has not achieved merit, he has never made a mistake. This is actually a great merit for the court. I hope your Majesty can understand Sir Fan's hard work and show me more leniency. Even if you want to investigate, you cannot be too negligent. With these words, everyone knew Shu Wu's position. The Ministry of Revenue had to be investigated, but it could not become a mess. The Crown Prince laughed coldly in his heart, thinking that Shu the scholar's 2 paragraphs were beautiful. Since he didn't know where the rumors came from, it was hinting that even if the Ministry of Revenue owed something, perhaps it was someone in court who wanted to use the opportunity to do so. Shu the scholar also nodded in agreement. The investigation must be investigated. The emperor's face was calm. He asked the Minister of Works, "What do you mean?" A cold sweat trickled down the Minister of Works' back. He smiled bitterly and said, "These 2 years, the Ministry of Works has acted according to your Majesty's edict and the procedures of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. When moving money to the Ministry of Revenue, it has often not gone smoothly. However, official business does not interfere with private matters. I do not think that the Ministry of Revenue is purposely making things difficult for me. Perhaps the Ministry of Revenue really does sometimes find it inconvenient to move." This was a critical argument. If the Ministry of Revenue did not have a deficit, how could it be inconvenient to move? Immediately after, the Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, also clearly expressed his attitude. He was in charge of the examination of officials and the appointment and removal of personnel. Of course, he suggested that the emperor should thoroughly investigate the Ministry of Revenue. If there were problems, he should punish them. If there were no problems, it would reduce the pressure on the Ministry of Revenue. The emperor listened to these officials' secretive words and felt slightly annoyed. He furrowed his brows and used his finger to gently knock on the low table on the couch. Pointing at the thin memorials on the table, he said, "Memorials from Jiangnan. You all take a look." Eunuch Yao calmly stepped forward and accepted the memorials, handing them out to the officials' hands. For a moment, in the royal study, only the sound of the officials flipping through the memorials and the gradually heavy breathing could be heard. After a long time, the officials finally finished exchanging and reading. They raised their heads with shock on their faces. Shu Wu and Hu the scholar met each other's eyes and quickly turned their heads away. Neither of them could hide the deep worry in their hearts. If what the memorial said was true, then Minister Fan's daring was truly too big. Jiangnan Road Imperial Censor Guizheng has written that Fan Xian chose a puppet surnamed Xia to control during the palace treasury bidding. At the same time, He provided a large sum of silver for the Xia person to enter the palace treasury door. On one hand, he allowed the Xia person to snatch 6 of the treacherous path's bids. On the other hand, he allowed him a clash with the royal merchants and forcefully raised this year's bidding silver. The emperor's calm voice rang out again. It was so calm that it was as if he was talking about a topic that had nothing to do with him. Guozheng's suspects were the large amount of silver in Fan Xian's hands came from. The emperor looked at the officials and smiled coldly. I am also suspicious. Putting aside the matter of Fan Xian allowing his subordinates to compete with the royal merchants for profit, which official can tell me? Where did he get so much silver? Shu Wu's throat was dry. He couldn't speak. Only now did he know why so many court officials were certain that the Ministry of Revenue's deficit was enormous. It was because of the Jiangnan problem. The emperor's meaning was also very clear. Fan Xian was able to completely control the situation of the palace treasury bidding and use his subordinates to secretly control the 6 treacherous paths bids. The enormous amount of silver involved in this matter probably came from the Ministry of Revenue, from his father's hands. The officials were silent. At this moment, they were not afraid of offending Minister Fan. They were still immersed in this kind of shock. Looking at the inscription on the memorial, it should have arrived in the royal palace last night. The emperor should have long known that Fan Xian had used some dishonorable methods in the palace treasury bidding. However, the emperor's joyous expression in the court earlier was not fake. The emperor's silent endurance and deep foresight were indeed not something an official could guess. Perhaps the emperor liked Fan Xian earning silver for him, but did not like Fan Xian using the court's silver to earn silver for him. Only the emperor could move the court's silver. No one could move it on their own. It looked like the Fan family had truly touched the emperor's reverse scale this time. Amidst the silence, the second prince, who had only been allowed into the royal study again in February, smiled slightly and said, "Father, I have something to say." "Speak," the emperor said coldly. A calm smile rose to the second prince's gentle and beautiful face. He bowed to the officials and quietly said, "I have some grievances with Commissioner Fan, but I do not dare to not express my opinion because of this matter. I believe that since Fan Xian is far away in Jiangnan and has the identity of an imperial envoy, there is naturally no one holding him back. However, he allowed his subordinates to steal the court's silver for his own use, which is a great crime. The Ministry of Revenue's private transfer of national funds to Jiangnan is even closer to rebellion." This was setting the tone. Everyone knew he was targeting the Fan family, but no one could refute anything. The great prince, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Jiangnan Imperial Censor Guozheng has an old grievance with Fan Xian. Back then, in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice, he was almost punched in the back by Fan Xian." After saying this, he didn't continue to speak. Shu the scholar sat on the bench and listened. He thought to himself that this was an opportunity that had to be seized. Otherwise, if it really was as Guozheng said in his memorial, not only would the Ministry of Revenue be in chaos, Fan Xian and Jiangnan would also not have a good ending. With both sides in chaos, who knew how many heads would fall to the ground? The Qin court could not endure such a large disturbance. He quickly followed the great prince's words and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, I am not afraid to speak rudely about Guozheng, but I will say one more thing. This person rejoices in grandiose achievements and has done many rash actions. Last year, he was demoted to Jiangnan by the emperor. It is difficult to guarantee that he will not purposely exaggerate the matter and frame people because of his old grievance with Sir Fan Jr." Once the words "old grievance" came out, everyone couldn't help but glance at the second prince who had the deepest grievance with Fan Xian. Although the second prince still maintained a beautiful smile on his face, in reality, his face was beginning to heat up. He glanced at the great prince with hidden bitterness. Since his youth, he and the great prince had a deep brotherly relationship. He completely didn't understand why his big brother had to stand on that bastard's side. There were some things to do today and in the next few days. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.